Hey listeners, we made a little mistake in the news this week. There's a story about Just Stop Oil protesters being sentenced with really harsh sentences in the news. The people that have been sentenced were arrested in the process of trying to do the protest, but the protest did actually take place. So please disregard the little part where we said that it didn't happen. It seems like they had started the protest and then were in the process of doing more when they were caught.
It's been calling Zelensky, Putin this, it's been facing the wrong way that, it's been cognitive decline, dementia, but honestly, like, I don't know, like, I should step down for the good of my party and the country. He seems to be mentally well to me. I think he's on the money there, right? Am I wrong? Like he's
Yeah, if
he's nailing it.
anything, more coherent than we've ever seen him.
This could just be evidence that Kamala Harris was the one who actually wrote the statement, but who knows?
That's what I was going to say. There's no evidence that he actually wrote that.
Yeah.
He's going to be waking up from a nap soon, and he's going to have no idea what's happening.
The nightmare nap. It's like that horrible feeling when you've had a nap and you wake up and you don't know where you are, you don't know what time it is.
Yeah.
But for him, that's just every day and normal, so he just feels normal. And then this happens, and he's like, "Oh no, it's like I've had a nap."
Symptoms of COVID include waking up and thinking that you resigned from the presidency by mistake, and then finding out that you did. Oh no, but it was actually.
Yeah.
It's Red Planet. Welcome everyone to Red Planet, and it's time to ask that special question to my favorite mule. It's Mule, and I'm asking Mule, what's the most base thing you did this week?
Whoa, Sophie! The most base thing that I did this week, probably some quite important operational stuff. So yeah, basically, like at GMTU, we've been looking for a proper complaint process that is something that we can apply sort of transformative justice as well as safeguarding too. Because of course, I think like a lot of organizations get really scared when they hear like semi-corporate terms like safeguarding and complaint processes and stuff like that, but actually they're really important to have because GMTU is unfortunately like we've set it up as a limited company, like because we have staff, we pay staff, it just has to be run like that basically, and we could be liable for doing things wrong if we like end up getting sued and there's not like a complaint process, there's not a paper trail, etc., etc. All these kinds of things. There's so many things that could go wrong, but actually, from like a based point of view, all these little bits and pieces are really important as well. Safeguarding is super important because, for example, you can't go around calling everyone like a murderer or a cop or a violent attacker or whatever, because actually if people just start to take people by their word on that and no actual evidence, then you've got no one in an organization and it all falls apart. So what you really need is safeguarding to ensure that actually the bad things that people like that could do are impossible to happen on your watch. So that's kind of what you have to do when you have an organization with a structure in it, regardless, because I mean it's important to keep your comrades safe, right? And these words can seem super scary and corporate, but actually they are really important. So I actually had a big meeting with a third party company that we're dealing with called Rhizome. Really, really good. Rhizome, like the thing that's in a plant's root or whatever. I don't know. I don't know if I'm right about that. It's sort of like supposed to be named after that.
When you've mentioned Rhizome, have they said that it's named after the root system?
They've not said that, no. But
right,
that's what it sounds like.
I've been becoming more and more of a Deleuze girly recently over the last few months. Like they have a thing about rhizomatic thought that's about like network structures and like the changing shapes of things interlinking with each other. And I've been like,
that might be what it is.
Referencing my two favorite eggs, Sheila Deleuze and Felicia Gotwari, maybe.
I feel like we've had rhizome discussions here before, so this is
Well, we call it fungus thought because we independently invented it because Deleuze is playing on my kindergarten level.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, but it sounds like it's gonna be more that because what I'm saying is very, very basic. But that's just kind of who I am. I'm just kind of basic. So really important stuff. And these things are super important for orgs. It is unfortunately part of like, chair responsibilities to ensure that there are like very boring but very important things in place in order to prevent things from going very badly. So the most base things that you're going to hear about me going forward are probably not like, I stopped an eviction with my friends. It's going to be more like, I sat down and did some paperwork. It's really important, but it's not that exciting. But this is kind of what I hope. I'm sort of like, I don't know, I guess broadcasting to people as I'm telling you about this stuff, this very, very boring but important stuff, is that actually there are so many different ways to help an organization, not just by being on the ground, not just by being like a physical body in a room or physical body on an eviction protest or an eviction resistance or a protest or whatever. So yeah, I think it's important to remember that, and you could be literally the chair of an organization and doing that stuff, because a lot of the stuff I do is simply remote. I do it over Zoom. I do a lot of Google Docs stuff. It's all very, 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 very remote. So yeah, everyone has their place in the revolution, and yours could be chair of an org or another remote position. So, next up, Tim, what's the most base thing you did this week?
Well, I haven't actually done it yet, which is the thing. But spoke with an org about I'm going to do some artwork and stuff for them for an upcoming initiative and little thingy. So, which is cool, because if we remember at the start of the year, one of my things was that I wanted to be doing more kind of like artwork for various causes and things like that. And I already have a bunch, like for charity stuff, fundraisers and things like that. But yeah, more of that is always good. Can't say too much about what it is yet. It's still coming together. But yeah, looking forward to that. That should be fun. I love it when people are willing to they came to me and want to get a little bit freaky with it. So that should be fun. Yeah, and obviously I'll update when I've done it. But yeah, what about Soph? What have you been up to?
Relatively, I mean, okay, so like I've done more of my writing. I'm progressing towards getting my writing done, which will be the end of my hiatus, and I'll be back to publishing videos. I think that's based because I am working on something I'm quite proud of, but I recognize that that's just the same answer I gave last week. I've been a bit under the weather mentally this week, and just like struggling. But my friends have been there for me, and I've been there for them. And like yesterday, a friend of mine got some frustrating and bad news, and we were gonna go to an underground communist rave together. And we were waiting to find out the location for it. And then we were like, do we want to stay in and watch cartoons? And then like she got some bad news, and we were like, we definitely want to stay in and watch cartoons. And so I guess I'm gonna say my most basic thing this week was just like being there for my friends who were also there for me, and taking care of myself and taking care of them. But Mule, do you want to tell us about our based viewer, Joe?
I will do, yeah. Based viewer Joe, this week I went door knocking for the first time, she says, as part of an outreach drive for a tenants union I'm part of. Whilst it was dispiriting when people weren't interesting, I had multiple good conversations with fellow renters and came away excited to go knocking again. Really based Joe, really, really cool. I'm sure I don't know who that person is. Never met her before in my entire life. But thank you so much for letting us know. I think it's really, really cool. I think that's a really, really good point to mention as well. Like, if you're going to do tenants union stuff, you're going to do a lot of door knocking. It's sort of like it's literally, like Joe says, an outreach drive for members, member recruitmentship kind of thing. And yeah, you are going to get people who don't understand what it is. They don't know what it's about. They don't know the benefit of it. People are very, very individualist and a little bit scared, especially when you like knock on their doors and talk about stuff. But actually, you'd be surprised at how much of a conversation you can have with people who are just desperate to moan about their living conditions. So I think that's really, really cool. Big up, Joe. And as always, we want to know what base things you've been doing. You can message us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, or send an email to based@redplanetshow.com. Include your name and pronouns if you're cool with that, and we may shout it out in a later episode. But Soph, why don't you tell us about the most important news? This is the biggest news. It's breaking news. It's so important. Yeah, you tell us. You tell us. I won't go on any more about it.
You mean Bangladesh? I'll tell you about Bangladesh.
Yeah, I do mean
absolutely.
Bangladesh. Yeah.
So there are massive protests going on in Bangladesh right now. The beginning of these protests that I believe have been going on for the last few weeks has to do with the youth unemployment has been rising for the last few years, and there's a quota in Bangladesh for government jobs and is privileging people who I think were in families of people who fought in the 1971 war. And students have been protesting this, but the government cracked down on their protests, right? But this had the effect that we're always discussing on this show, that like when states crack down on protests, so often this actually energizes loads of people, and so the protests have become absolutely massive. The Independent reports Bangladesh has imposed a national curfew, and the army has been deployed after 105 people died in the bloodiest protests for a decade after student protesters stormed a prison and freed inmates. From the Al Jazeera article titled "It's War Now," as Bangladesh quota protests escalate, what's next? Bangladesh has announced a nationwide curfew amid a telecommunications blackout that has cut the country of 170 million people off from the rest of the world as clashes between students and security forces have intensified. So the government has shut down phone and internet connectivity. The protests have continued to escalate from there. We're gonna basically need to keep an eye on this as it develops for the next however long it goes on for. But I think that this is one to check back in on next week. Because it seems like the kind of situation where everything the government is doing is making people more intent on stopping what they're doing and joining in on protesting harder. Some of the protesters have hacked websites, including those of the central bank and the Prime Minister's office and the police, with messages such as "Stop killing students" and "It's not a protest anymore, it's a war now." So yeah, shit has got really intense in Bangladesh, and like I say, it's going to be one that's continues to heat up by all indicators. Speaking of heating up, it's a climate joke. It's a climate joke I'm doing because the next news is about climate protesters also being cracked down by the state. Tim, can you tell us about Just Stop Oil?
I can indeed. We heard about this a couple of days ago, and it's like, I feel like this is huge because there has been, we've been seeing various states and institutions, whatever, kind of ramping up the rhetoric against a lot of these protesters, a lot of like Just Stop Oil and similar groups. And I think it also mirrors a lot of what we saw with the protesters from Stop Cop City, where the nonviolent protests framed as like terrorism, as like, as like using these really inflammatory terms and all these kind of things, which was then used to kind of, I guess, like the media would use these terms to change public sentiment against the protesters, right? Because it's really hard. It's like, if you put it in plain terms, it's probably really hard to convince normal working class people that what these people have done is like, as a crime or whatever. But when it's framed as like terrorism and all this kind of stuff, it's really inflammatory. And so with Cop City as well, this kind of climate was used to kind of get public opinion against the protesters, which then when they go to court, it's like, it's a slam dunk. It's like, oh yeah, these people, we can drum up some really big charges and long sentences and stuff. But this is really like pretty extreme. This is definitely the most intense, like the biggest sentences that we've seen in the UK.
Yeah, it's like it's I've been wondering about this with the jury being urged not to consider climate science and not to consider the testimony on their intents behind the protest, because
It's like
obviously
wild.
obviously juries convict, like juries decide whether you're innocent or guilty, and then the judge sentences, and the judge has gone for like these incredibly harsh sentences while also urging the jury to try and like tip them towards guilty. And I kind of wonder if the jury in this case were kind of like, I guess if I'm being told that I have to think this
Yeah.
way, then I suppose they're guilty, and then the judges come down hard. But I also wonder if it's going to have exactly the same effect again, where it's just like this precedent makes more juries be like, oh, we really can't find anyone guilty because they're going to be doing this kind of shit, you know?
Yeah, it's wild. So yeah, we've got they've all got sort of like 4 or 5 years each. I think it's like a total of like 21 years together, which is wild. Yeah, for planning a nonviolent protest. It was the plan was to block off traffic on a motorway. Yeah, it's the kind of thing where it's like, okay, cool, yeah, that could be disruptive. It's like, and the previous ones have been where people have said like, oh, like all this stuff has happened. There were, like people missed important dates and all this kind of stuff. But it's really one of those things where it's like, this is, I think, a non-violent protest it's always going to have some kind of disruptive element, right? Like it has to be. That's a protest, right? And you're supposed to be in any democratic state. You're supposed to have the right to protest. But yeah, so so it kind of does ask these. It starts asking these bigger questions of the courts and what their responsibility is to uphold the rights of people versus the rights of these kind of like petrochemical billionaires. But yeah, so they were caught. They were caught close to the M25 motorway, and they were dressed as if they were about to start this protest. With all their climbing gear and everything like that. And they had, they'd bought all the equipment. They'd even rented a small safe house that to get ready in and presumably to go to afterwards. But yeah, so they were arrested before they could even do anything, which is interesting because there have been many trials in the past where people have gotten prepared to do something and not done it. And, in court, that has been taken into account and been like, oh, okay, actually, no, you didn't do the thing that you did. But this is to arrest them and charge them at this point is saying, like, this is like, it doesn't matter, that you haven't done it yet. And I think that's why a lot of the rhetoric around it, especially from the judges, saying that they're calling them fanatics, saying like, oh, you're not just a concerned climate campaigner, but you are a fanatic, and all this kind of stuff, which I think is meant to kind of I guess exacerbate this idea that these people are like unhinged, but also to be like, oh yeah, there was no chance that they weren't going to break the law. They were 100% going to break the law, which is kind of like, well, they were going to protest, whether that is actually breaking the law or not is another thing. But yeah, I think it's really sneaky and pretty harsh from the judge, a judge who has a history of being actually quite lenient in sentencing. We've seen him cut down a lot of charges for people in the past, people that have had serious like violent offenses, like pedophiles, sex offenders, and all this kind of stuff. And he's been extremely lenient in sentencing them, but when you threaten the interests of capital, then like that's it. And that's what we've said about the Cop City stuff as well, right? Like when they start throwing out these sentences, when they start acting like this, that's how you kind of know, like that's what's really threatening them. That's what's kind of scaring them. But
yeah, he also was really lenient in sentencing an actual cop as well, from what I read. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff. There was a cop that had committed a sex offense, and there was also even like some dudes that had like, I think some like drunk lads that had beaten up a cop, and then he gave, let them off as well. So across the board, pretty lenient in a lot of different cases. But yeah, so like cause as much havoc as you want in the community amongst working class people. But if you threaten the bottom line, the profits, then that's another story. Um, yeah, so it is interesting because these are peaceful protesters. Um, yeah, essentially denied the ability to use their free speech to protest. So yeah, I think that it's kind of it's worrying, it's upsetting. Hopefully, they actually don't have to serve their full sentences. Hopefully they can get out before then, or hopefully there's some kind of appeal that they can get out of. I would I hate to think that this is going to be a new precedent, like that this is going to be where it's going to go. If anything, I would love to see this as kind of a rallying point for that more people to see this and be like, this is actually, this is bad. Like what Soph was saying. So jurors in the future might be like, oh man, like actually, like maybe these guys were going to protest, but we don't want to, if we say guilty, they're going to go to jail for a long time, and that's bad.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
one of the sources we have for this article was reporting on like the number of driver hours or something, like the amount of delay that the protest would cause collectively by the number of people who would be like trying to drive on the motorway at that time. And it's like it's one thing when establishment media tries to cloak this in like moralistic concerns, like, oh shit, what if someone was driving on the M25 and their wife was giving birth in the back seat and like the protest, blah blah, or like they were trying to get somewhere, there was an ambulance, or they were trying to go to a funeral, or all sorts of things like this, or a wedding, like it would be one thing to try and make this about life and about like this kind of moral stuff, but they know they've lost the moral ground because like the protesters are trying to stop the world from ending.
yeah,
And then so they just turn it directly into like, this is about productivity. Like this is about our ability to function. This is about our infrastructure. And they're trying to harm our infrastructure, right?
yeah. They're talking about like, yeah, these lorries getting turned around and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And I mean, I've been involved with actions before and heard of them down here where there have been people that have been like, oh, my kid's got to get to his like specialist medical appointment, and then the protest is just being like, okay, cool, let's we can just divert you around here, you might be a couple minutes late or whatever, but we're going to do our best to try and get you there, and like
Yeah,
opening up for like emergency vehicles and things like that, like that definitely
absolutely.
happens. um
There was an
you know
example of an action in the UK at one point where the cops delayed an ambulance so
mm,
that they could blame it on the protesters, and I think it was JSO. It was either JSO or XR. Like made a statement afterwards saying like, no, we always let ambulances through.
yeah,
They wouldn't let the ambulance through, so they could blame it on us. And they were discussing it on the ground at the time that they wanted to blame it on us. But I think
yeah,
that this is this judicial, like the legal process going on here is like it's a moment where we can kind of unpack what we're saying on the show about the way that like states clamping down on stuff drives like revolutionary sentiment more,
mm,
because we've said it the last few weeks since like Tim and I both read Shanice McBean and Avi Aday's Abolition Revolution. Like
mm,
one of the key principles of policing is policing by consent. Like the
yeah,
idea that the police are part of the population and it's the population taking care of itself and it's one cohesive like society rather than there being a ruling class with a little citizen militia oppressing the working class. And
mm,
like when when the actions of the criminal justice system turn against the working class nakedly, right?
yeah,
It just becomes like an all-out confrontation, and that's why I think you've got both these
mm,
sentences, like Tim was pointing out, like for the disruption and sabotage of capital, so blatant compared to people doing stuff that actually hurts people, um uh like, and at the same time you've got like the media reporting on the infrastructure being harmed because they're just trying to appeal to people who are just like utterly fash brained, people who are just
yeah,
fully like doing like Garrett Hardin lifeboat ethics, people who are just like entirely like I believe in preserving the project and fuck the planet and fuck the poor and fuck the like global south and everything, fuck the imperial periphery, all the brown people far away, get them out of our country back, all of this, right?
Mm.
You know,
Yeah,
and
I think it's also a really good point to remind people that, like, if you do peaceful protests and you plan them openly, they will still put you in jail.
yeah,
You know, so OPSEC is good. We've done a couple of episodes about OPSEC. Do that.
mm,
And also, like, you know, I would never, and Red Planet would never condone anyone doing
yeah,
unpeaceful protests that are specifically unpeaceful and you know, based in sabotage of the
yeah,
fossil fuel industry and the machines that maintain it. But people are just going to start doing that. People are going to start doing that. They've already started doing it, and people are just going to do it more. And if those people do that, I'm probably sure they'll do some good OPSEC and
yeah.
not get arrested.
Well, speaking of OPSEC, a big part of the story is actually that the reason that they were caught before they did this is because a reporter infiltrated a Zoom call, and, you know, like obviously took notes, recorded everything, took it to the police, who then, you know, did the arrest. But the police actually offered the reporter like an exclusive opportunity to come along with them to the arrest, which is actually like quite perverse, you know. But they obviously, you know, that kind of highlights the role that the media play in this kind of stuff. But yeah, and also
I mean,
and the
just
judge.
on that in the UK, especially like the media. I think this is so true across the imperial core, but like the UK is such a class stratified society, and so nakedly so that
Mm,
like the ruling class, the police, the media establishment, like there is just so much like people who went to private school who know each other,
yeah.
who like, I mean, not so much in the police, but in the higher ups in the police, it is still true. But like people who went to private schools who know each other, people who were born into the ruling class and have been like sort of trained in the ways of the ruling class their entire life. And
Freemasons as well.
I'm not trying not to turn it conspiratorial, but the
It's
Freemasons
not
do exist and are a
conspiratorial.
part of
They
this.
write they do a little A and they miss out and they make it look like a compass when they're doing the application, and that's how their mates know that they're a Freemason, and they give them the
And
job.
I I know my granddad was one. I do know about this, but the but the what was I saying? Like the media, right? Like that reporter getting included in that stuff. It's just like we don't have we try, like our capitalist media tries to scaremonger and like fearmonger and scare us about like in communist countries there isn't freedom of the press because they're all dictatorships or whatever. It's like we don't have freedom of the press because fucking the press, like we don't have journalists who exist to speak truth to power, right? Like we just don't. We just have awful fucking sycophantic bootlickers who exist to like go on a ride along with cops, playing cop for a day, having a great time,
Mm,
enjoying the idea of being the violent enforcers of the ruling class agenda.
yeah. Well, so one final note on this is that the judge in the M25 case actually had argued, you know, in court that Parliament had made it clear that they had seen that they would view non-violent direct action against national infrastructure as serious, and they actually passed a law allowing the judge to give a sentence of up to 10 years, which is, yeah, can be a lot more than for some violent offenses, which is wild, you know, like they were like, here's a law to punish, you know, like these direct action against so non-violent direct action against national infrastructure. So this isn't like, you know, like any kind of actual kind of like sabotage, like physical sabotage. This is non-violent direct action. So this is non-violent protest, and national infrastructure can be, you know, like anything from like, yeah, pipelines to highways, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, so this is extreme. Like this, even just like passing of these laws is really like, you know, that's kind of an escalation from the state, I would say. But yeah, that's what's happening there. We'll keep everyone updated as it kind of as it goes, because I feel like there is going to be a lot of callbacks to this with future climate protests. But Mule, why don't you tell us what's going on with Bethesda?
I will. I'll tell you what's going on with Bethesda. They're making Elder Scrolls 6, and they're going to make it even better because their workers are unionizing. And it's not even like one sort of section of a big games development company that is unionized. So for what I mean by that is in the past, Bethesda's quality assurance team unionized. I think it was like 300 members. ZeniMax Studios, not Bethesda. Bethesda's parent company, ZeniMax, had their quality assurance team form the largest union in the industry at the time. 300 of them. And then Activision as well, the quality assurance workers at Activision, they also unionized. And but now, this time, it's just absolutely huge. On Friday, they announced that they've unionized under the Communications Workers of America, the CWA. It's the first Microsoft-owned game studio to do so. So that's why it's so exciting, really, because Microsoft is obviously this huge, awful, monopolistic, capitalist company. It's got so many, it's literally bought up so many different companies in its time. And it's quite funny, actually, that this is sort of news that I'm talking about this week, because I've literally just bought, finished, and played Yooka-Laylee, which, if people don't know, if there's no gamers out there who played Yooka-Laylee, yeah, it's basically the guys who made Banjo-Kazooie back in the day. They always wanted to make Banjo 3, but then because they made 2 Banjo-Kazooie games, they wanted to call Banjo 3, and they couldn't because Microsoft bought Rare, which was their company at the time, and so they own all the IP and shit like that. And that whole game, Yooka-Laylee, is basically kind of a big, I guess, piss take of companies that do that. Like the big baddie in that game is a big capitalist. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. It's really, really, really important stuff. So basically, this was on the 19th. Workers at Bethesda Game Studios announced that they're unionizing in a wall-to-wall effort. It's a step up from the previous QA worker unionization. Senior system designer Mandy Parker said in a press release, "It's clear that every worker can benefit from bringing democracy into the workplace and securing a protected voice on the job. We're thrilled to get down to brass tacks and win a fair contract, proving that our unity is a source of real power to positively shape our working conditions, our lives, and the company as a whole. Solidarity to the Bethesda Game Studios workers who've been the scapegoat of Bethesda's management terrible decisions and victims of their crunch culture for far too long, and solidarity to all the workers of the CWA from all of us here at Red Planet, and I truly hope that Todd is shaking in his boots." But Soph, hit us with the Palestine update.
Yeah, absolutely. Week in, week out, the genocide of Palestinians continues by the fascist state of Israel. 2 pieces of news that we want to focus on this week are that the ICJ has ruled that Israel fucking sucks. Fuck them. That was the official statement by the UN this week. No, they said that Israel's presence in occupied Palestinian territories is illegal and should end. I believe they're only threatening fines if they don't end their presence in Palestinian territories, but they have also ruled that other countries should not aid them in their occupation, which will either have a chilling effect on American aid to Israel or will bring America quite directly in conflict with the UN, which either way, bad news for American imperialism enjoyers. It's the UN, a structure of American imperialism, coming into direct conflict with American imperialism's favorite game of 2024, the genocide of Palestinians. Yeah, but hopefully for the immediate relief of the people of Palestine, this has a chilling effect, and countries are forced to stop aiding Israel in what they're doing. This is where was it? The Associated Press reports Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu quickly denounced the non-binding opinion issued by the 15-judge panel of the ICJ, saying the territories are part of the Jewish people's historic homeland. But the resounding breadth of the decision could impact international opinion and fuel moves for a unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. The second piece of news that we want to focus on this week is that the Houthis actually carried out a drone strike that hit Tel Aviv this week. Obviously, a lot of the mainstream reporting on this is along the lines of what the Guardian said here. Israel shaken as fatal Houthi drone hits Tel Aviv. Wow, wow. Oh no, I'm addicted to doing a genocide and I can't stop doing a genocide, and now the consequences are happening to me. 1 dead and at least 10 injured, with human error blamed for allowing drone to escape multi-layered air defenses. So essentially, the Iron Dome let one through, and the Houthis have hit Tel Aviv this week. And yeah, they're
taking
saying
out
that
a high-level elite sniper, they said.
goddamn.
Which is like funny because it's like, okay, so was the strike that precise, or is it just because it's like shooting fish in a barrel? Because you know, everyone over there was like, did their conscription, they were like high-level snipers, when really they're just like, you know, like there's that thing where they just promote them so quick over there, and like, you know, what does an IDF sniper do anyway?
There are like 25-year-olds. There are like 25-year-old like captains and corporals and whatever in the IDF, because they just promote them so fast. It's shocking. I find it funny, the human error blamed for it. Like the Iron Dome should be handed over to ChatGPT instead, so that it'll do a better job next time.
I've always wondered exactly how the Iron Dome functions, and is a large portion of it like just mythologizing about how amazing it is. We'll see.
I mean, I think it's classic, like it's simple reification in giving something a special name, right? Like I think there have been for forever like surface-to-air missile defense systems, right? Like just ways to stop missiles from hitting whatever territory that you want to protect if you have the resources to do it. And like they, you know, just hyping it up as the Iron Dome, like it's this special thing, or as if there's some magical force field over Israel.
Because they call all of their offensive operations like Operation Cast Lead and Operation Protective Edge and shit like that. It's the same shit. It's the same shit.
But those are the Palestine updates that we wanted to cover this week. So Tim, do you want to tell us about Ireland?
Well, so big things happening in Ireland. So the All-Party Parliamentary Committee has called for immediate preparations for a united Ireland. So, you know, as most of you know, there's been Ireland and Northern Ireland for a long time. But people have wanted, so Northern Ireland is the part that is occupied by the British. So, you know, that's all the stuff like the Troubles, or, you know, the IRA, all that kind of stuff comes from resistance to the British occupation of Northern Ireland. So, so it's been a goal for a long time for various groups over there to reunify Ireland as one like Irish kind of, you know, like it's like one Irish nation, as opposed to Ireland and then an occupied portion. So an all-party committee has called for immediate preparations for United Ireland, urging all government departments to consider the implications of constitutional change. So that would be big, you know, like constitutional change for any nation is huge, but but they're actually seriously looking at you know, they're getting ready for this thing, which I mean, it is like, wait, so we were talking about this last week. This was prophesized in Star Trek.
That's
Irish
right.
reunification of 2024.
The Irish reunification
actually,
of 2024.
Data was listing instances when terrorism worked to achieve its goals, and Irish reunification of 2024 is one of them, and it might actually make it in by the end of the year.
Yeah, it's you know, it's this could be a great moment for for Star Trek fans. But so the Committee on the Implementation of the Good Friday Agreement recommends publishing a green paper which would outline a vision for a united Ireland and establishing a dedicated committee whose name I cannot pronounce. But it looks like
I think it's Erectus.
Erectus? Okay. Yeah,
Erectus,
Erectus.
yeah.
Sounds like a Mad Max warlord. Not spelled like that, spelled more like a Lord of the Rings warlord. So the report highlights a significant increase in cross-border trade from 2 billion euros in 1998 to 20 billion in 2022 and examines the economic relationship and potential of an all-island economy. Politicians stress the importance of planning for a united Ireland with Fine Gael TD Fergus O'Dowd. And I think TD is like the equivalent of like an MP or something, right? Like that's what a TD is. That's what I got from reading about it. Yeah. So anyway, Fergus O'Dowd from Fine Gael emphasized the need for serious discussion, and Sinn Féin TD Rose Conway Walsh advocating for implementing the report's recommendations. So, you know, that's good to hear. And yeah, there's differing opinions on the actual readiness for this united Ireland, though, with some officials highlighting economic disparities and the need for further conversations to address concerns and ensure inclusive planning. So yeah, it's interesting. It seems like the conversation is not should it happen, but are we ready for it to happen now? You know, we'll see how that develops. Would be great even just to chalk up another big W for Star Trek. But yeah, I think there are a lot of people that have been waiting a long time for a reunified Ireland. So great to see. But why don't we, what's happening, Mule, a little bit closer to home for you? What's happening in Leeds?
Yeah, so there's been reports of riots in Leeds in the UK over the last couple of days. One major thing that most of these reports are leaving out is what has led up to these riots. So the community in Hare Hills in Leeds is basically where the riots started. They, you know, I would call them personally an uprising. You know, an active resistance to police oppression, because essentially the community in Hare Hills is mostly Roma, you know, Roma travelers, the GMT community, and also, sorry, not the GMT, the GRT community, and also a lot of migrants. There's a lot of resettled migrants there, also first and second generation migrants too. So it's a very sort of like deprived area, an over-policed area. I think that's like the thing to really drive home here. Areas like this are always over-policed. And, you know, whenever you hear reports of like, oh, there's so much crime going on in this area, oh, it's so gross, and that's because there's just police arresting people for no reason other than they're just sick scumbags. And particularly the Roma community in Hare Hills over the last however long, the last few years have been being harassed. I mean, the Roma community have been harassed for decades, you know, centuries actually, probably. But the Roma community in Leeds have been harassed over the last good few years anyway, by police for all sorts of things, you know, just in terms of how Roma people live, and a lot of a lot of these Roma people in Hare Hills aren't even your sort of like traditional traveller community. They're like not living in caravans and stuff. They've been forced out of caravans and forced into social housing, forced into private housing because of the laws that were passed that Kill the Bill was in opposition to, where there were no. Basically, it was ruled that travellers were not allowed to settle on any site ever, basically. So
the police crime sentencing and courts bills included a lot of anti-trespass stuff. There were parallel protests to the Kill the Bill protests, such as there were basically mass trespasses going on where people would do actions where they would just go on, like just trespass to show like it's fine, it's whatever, like going onto land that like it should be public land, it should be common land, it's not being used as farmland, it is someone's property but not being used for anything. There was one that a friend of mine was involved in where there was actually common land, but it had been enclosed on every side by private land. So to be able to get to the common land that like the public should have access to, you had to go through private land. So they just did a mass trespass where they just passed through all the private land to get there.
Yeah, yeah. So essentially, that's a little bit of the history of the Roma community in Hare Hills, what they've been going through over the last, few years since the police crimes and sentencing bill. Anyway, and what's also been happening is a lot of harassment of families, in terms of social services going into GRT homes. Looking at some of the GRT people there and going, oh, you can't read, you can't write, therefore you're not fit to be a parent. Stuff like this, making these really arbitrary decisions, taking their kids away. And this is like a really deep thing for the Roma community, because Roma people's kids have been traditionally abducted by the police and then put into care systems, and then white families have adopted them. And it's just, this has just been happening again and again and again and again in Hare Hills, to the point where it got too much. And literally the other day, Thursday night in the UK, there were 5 kids that were sort of basically taken away by police to be put in the back of a police car. And that's when the riots started, because they just said, no, we're not doing this anymore. We're not letting you do this anymore. We're not letting you take any more of our kids. That's what it's about. And, we were talking earlier about the way that the media has the stranglehold on anything in this country, as well in the imperial core at large. Most of the news sources that you'll hear talking about this won't even talk about the Roma community, and if they are talking about the Roma community, they're talking about how violent and savage they are actually in turning over police cars and burning double-decker buses and stuff like that. But of course, no one wants to talk about the savagery of the bureaucracy of the social services in this country, and also the police themselves. So I think it's really important to remember that. This is about Roma children essentially being abducted by the state. And the community have stood up and said they want no part of it. And also, the immigrant community have stood alongside them as well in this, because they too, face so much oppression and violence at the hands of the state. So, solidarity with everyone struggling against the state in Leeds. I think it's really important to just, be absolutely frank about this stuff. I don't think that, there's anything to be gained by I don't know, trying to condemn some kind of perceived political, mistake that people might be making, or or anything like that. The reason that I mention that is that there's apparently been some councillors who've been trying to say, no, stop the rioting, we understand you, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, no, actually, you don't understand them if you think that the rioting is too much of a response, actually. So yeah, absolutely. Solidarity with the community in Hare Hills there. And I hope that the police harassment can end, not just there, but also for everyone all over the world, really.
Yeah,
But
that's the thing, right? It's
go ahead.
The more I hear about what happens to the travelers over there, the more with the child uplifting and kind of a lot of the criminalization of the way of life, it is so similar to down here. And also other indigenous nations around the world and stuff. It's pretty horrific, but it all has the same, it's all this way of it's closing in the kind of creating a way of living that is productive and very kind of aligned with capitalist values or whatever. And a lot of people travelers and other groups, various indigenous communities around the world, all kind of sit outside of that. And so it's a way of subjugating them through the legal system to turn them into good little, not to be as corny as everyone says, but little capitalist worker drones. But,
well, I think it's a really interesting case, the traveler community, because the traveler community comprises several different ethnic groups, and part of what's happened is that people who aren't familiar, I know we have obviously an international audience, and there are people who don't really know about the situation with European travelers, and there is a really solid comparison to make with indigenous people, because it's the state and the post-enclosures society trying to like force any other way of life than like settled capitalist lifestyle, being a subject of capital, out of existence, right? But like at the same time, like travelers, like like it's certainly true for a lot of Romani groups, like um began living in this way because of pre-capitalist ruling class like mandates, like looking for like low wage workers to do like certain kinds of labor that was just like no one else would do. And so like the living in caravans and the traveling from place to place became a lifestyle that was actually like in line with the kind of work they were doing. And like a lot of people, if people know the term drover, drovers were people who basically get livestock to cross like large distances across the UK.
Yeah.
Like a lot of drovers would like travel with traveler groups and then like end up marrying in and joining like their families. And like it's just a really interesting kind of anthropological case of like the ways that like an ethnic group can be kind of manufactured by the systems of the state. Not to like all ethnic groups like emerge from somewhere. This is not to like challenge the legitimacy in any way. What I'm trying to like get at is that like the state is doing similar shit to migrants now. Like it's migrants who pick all of our fruits and vegetables, and a lot of them are made to live in caravans and have their like passports taken away and shit. And so like the solidarity between the migrant community and the traveler community there is like where Mule was saying like there was kind of any kind of accusation of political wrongheadedness here and like stop the rioting. It's like, no, it's fantastic that there's solidarity between migrants in the UK and travelers in the UK, because they being put in the same boat by this. And then you know there is a lot of like it's not just establishment media, it's also like the like social media that's been bought out by the ruling class. I mean, you know, it's already manufactured and controlled by the ruling class, but like Twitter's been bought out by Elon Musk and you know deliberately neutralizes any kind of like democratic force on it, and now it's just full of fascists going like, if you see coverage of the Leeds riots, the way I first saw it was like people smashing up a cop car, and I was like, fucking hell yeah. And it was just and it was someone posting it saying like, okay, maybe it's just time to move somewhere else, and someone else being like, yeah, Lanzarotte's great, like all of this. And it was just like it was just ridiculous. Like,
actually, yeah, if that is your opinion, then yeah, fuck off.
Get out then. Get away from
off.
Get away
Time
from
to get
country.
deported, bro. Like,
just hang out here, the transgenders and the migrants and the travelers, and we'll have a fucking great time. And you can just piss off. But anyway, I think I rambled on with that one, so I'll stop it. But yeah, you know, I just think it is interesting, and that solidarity is good, and
yeah, 100%, definitely. But it is actually, I think, your turn again, Soph, actually, to do more talking.
Well, it's pertinent to what we were just discussing, because the thing I want to tell you about is that Labour has announced a fast track on deportations. Starmer's new Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has stated that she has plans for a summer blitz of immigration raids with a team of 1,000 staff dedicated to fast tracking deportations. And you know, there's a lot going on here. The UK's like border policy and immigration policies have been a fraught issue for such a long time within like mainstream and electoral politics, and it's just such a fucking joke, because the idea that people want to be here, the idea that people like we have one of the lowest like settlement and migration rates of the whole of Europe, because like it's actually shit here, and people know that they're not going to get anything, and there's an incredibly hostile climate, and the mainstream political tactic has just been to try and make the country shitter on purpose to make people not want to be here. It's shit, it's meant to be shit. If you don't like it, there's the door. You know, that's the policy. And now there's, you know, just this even more like open hostility towards migrants. And in the last few years, we've seen people standing up against this, right? There was the famous Peckham immigration raid resistance, and we've had someone from the Glasgow immigration raid resistance on the show. We had the van guy who was underneath the van for several hours until they were able to get the detainees out and released. I've been involved in some immigration raid resistance stuff. Met a charming undercover cop there in her brand new trainers, and like it's just it's become something because the ruling class know it as a thing that they can like stoke up reactionary voters over. And like in terms of like getting a voter base churned up, right, to engage with electoral politics, to engage with the distraction away from what actually matters and away from class warfare, right, there has to be some kind of churning up on the progressive and the conservative side, on the progressive and the reactionary side. And this is all discussed in like completely normal terms, as if it's utterly normal to like, appeal to your base, like get people interested. But when you understand manufacturing consent and you understand that like what they're doing here is like getting people to invest in a total fantasy, a complete fiction, right? Then you see that they're just kind of activating people. Like they're just turning them into like agents from the Matrix. Like they were not thinking these things before, and they're putting the brainworms directly in their heads, right? Like as I was just saying, the UK economy needs migrant labor to function. Brexit has been an enormous fucking disaster for the ability of like just the everyday functioning of Britain, right? And like that's because we've completely fucked our influx of migrant labor, among other things, right? It's obviously also like trade deals with our nearest and largest partners. But like immigration then becomes like this huge thing for like churning up stoking the reactionary voter base. And then when the working class have started to resist the ruling class like kidnapping and deporting our neighbors, and the moves to do absolutely inhumane and insane fascist plans, right? Now that's being reported on too as I can't remember the headlines that they have, but they sound utterly insane, the way that they talk about immigration raid resistance, partly because it makes them sound really fucking cool unless you are like country back brained. Anyway, I think that all of that is necessary context for Yvette Cooper saying there's going to be a summer blitz of immigration raids, and basically like in the last few weeks we did see the Tories trying to do some of this to appeal to this reactionary voter base, like try to rush in lots of immigration raids and try to do enough as fast as possible as would like overwhelm immigration raid resistance. Now, of course, what the state and the police are failing to grasp here is that immigration raid resistance is done by local communities who don't want their neighbors to be kidnapped and put on a barge or flown to Rwanda, right? Like they think it's being done by like an activist org, right? Because they're familiar with like Roger Hallam in Just Stop Oil or whatever. Like they think that it's being done by like a group with a structure and not just by like people who are really pissed off that a van shows up and tries to grab their neighbors out of their community and take them away, when it's like that's their fucking neighbors, and it's kind of laying that bare when you understand it that way, because like Yvette Cooper in this interview that she did, by the way, with the Sun newspaper, and for those who don't know, the Sun, just utter scum, defamed so they are one of the reactionary right-wing rags in the UK and part of the Murdoch press, and they defamed the victims of the Hillsborough stadium collapse disaster, one of whom was actually my uncle. It's their defamation of those victims is the reason that the Sun is boycotted in Liverpool. If you don't know about it, just look it up and learn about the history of that. But like Labour getting their endorsement when Blair was running, and then getting their endorsement again with Starmer running, and now Yvette Cooper doing an interview with them, is just this like repeated spitting in the face of the British working class. And that's not my opinion. That's just plain to see. It's absolutely fucking disgusting.
Something actually, just very quickly on the Sun.
Yeah.
Great Manchester Tenants Union actually got a request from a journalist at the Sun to do an interview.
Did you tell them to eat your shit and hair?
No, we were very, very reserved in our response.
Oh.
And we encouraged the freelance journalist, who clearly would probably get an absolutely shit rate from the Sun, to not work for them. And even if they are going to work for them, then they should at least join the National Union of Journalists and be aware on how actually much they should be getting paid. No, but it was really funny. Like, the first thing that happened is that everybody in the committee group chat just started saying, "Yeah, fuck the sun, we're not doing this. Fuck this," because obviously, like, we haven't really got a mandate to just like not work with the sun. So it actually kicked off a discussion. To talk about having a mandate for journalist outlets that we're just not going to work with, and sort of state the reasons why. But I just thought it was so funny. Yeah. Everyone was immediately like, "Fuck this shit." Yeah, fuck them.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I'm very glad to hear that. But yeah, in this interview, Yvette Cooper just like talked directly about, like, I think nail and hair salons as like places that there are, like, undocumented migrant workers that they are going to be targeting and trying to remove people from. And it is just like I was saying, like the context of the context in which we all when you fall out of a coconut tree and then you, in the context, listen, Jack, no, the thing I was saying before about like the way that these are people being abducted by the state from their communities, and then their communities fight back, right? Yvette Cooper, I don't know how much she knows. She is walking directly into that field of rakes when she is saying, like, we're gonna target people from nail salons and hair salons, and like, she's just spelling out, these are people in your community. So I guess in conclusion, like, solidarity from Red Planet to everyone who is under like threat of this disgusting fascist policy from Labour, and all power to immigration raid resistances. Let's show the Home Office that they can eat shit in hell forever this summer and every other season of the year too.
They can.
Tim, what's up? Tell us the last news story.
Just before the last news story, I just saw a headline pop up from The Observer that is very relevant to our news today, from Sonia Sodha. There's an article here that said the headline is, "Yes, 5 years in jail is too harsh, but the Just Stop Oil 5 shouldn't have done it." That's the headline. The urgent needs of the road users they held up were ignored during this climate crusade. So this is the piece we were talking about earlier, where it does read as a pretty cynical ploy to frame the conversation as like, oh yeah, that is really bad, that was really extreme, but what they were doing was really bad, like they shouldn't have done that, to try and do that kind of rational centrist sort of thing, where it's like, yes, it's really extreme because they didn't do it, is the way we should be looking at that. But anyway, so the final piece, the least important news story for today, just before stream this morning, we found out that Biden has officially dropped out of the race. He's no longer seeking re-election, and he has instead chosen to endorse Kamala Harris for his pick. So yeah, just before the show, we found out there's still a couple other people in the running, but it seems like a lot of people are endorsing Harris as their pick. It is interesting seeing a lot of people get very excited about the first, like, woman of color president.
Sure. Really makes you feel like part of a history. The next ones will be sent by a woman of color.
Exactly. We've already had a man of color killing children at weddings and birthday parties. So now we can also get a woman of color historically famous for imprisoning and terrorizing women of color at home. We'll see her expand that to abroad as well. We've seen videos of her bragging about criminalizing single mothers, like sending them to jail for their kids, bad school attendance. So I don't think there's it's her policies seem like an extension of the racist policies that Biden
Absolutely.
created
I
when
mean,
he was
yeah,
young. Like it's a direct line.
yeah,
It makes a lot of sense that the Dem establishment would kind of shuffle her in there.
yeah. The
Yeah,
white
I think it's
supremacist project of the state is cohesive, and it does keep on building on itself. Like
yeah, yeah,
it being a woman of color does not change that at
exactly.
all. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, it's a big last minute shakeup. We'll see how it pans out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's still a couple other candidates, but yeah, like I said, I think that it's hard to really take any of them really seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
presumably we don't know this for sure, but it seems likely that Biden will like actually step down in the coming days, and then like Kamala Harris will be the like the incumbent president, which will make her
yeah.
harder to beat, and it will give her like better chances in the actual election. But I don't know if we can't know that, but like that's a possibility, and I think that like I think
I
Sorry,
feel
are
like
we all just going to ignore the fact that Conrad just said in our ears that's not going to happen?
yeah, I corrected myself to pretend like it was my own original thought. Okay,
Well,
this is
I
what we
think
have
that the
to do
thing
so that we can
is,
steal his
like,
thoughts and give him no credit.
at this point we can't be sure of like what their strategy is at all. Like it just seems
No,
like they're just throwing shit at the wall. They're seeing what's
yeah,
happening. He was tanking, so there was in the last couple days we've had like the Dem establishment people still pushing Biden, saying like never given up, like this, and then apparently never is not
yeah,
forever.
Well,
um
the only thing that is good about this is Twitter. This is the only time that Twitter is good. Even under Elon Musk, the first things that I saw on Twitter today when I logged on was some of the funniest things of all time. Like you had that like Brooklyn dad guy who's like a horrible Zionist and he loves Joe Biden. He just loved everything that Joe Biden did. And like like 3 hours before he resigned, he was saying like he was tweeting things like "Hold the line,"
yeah.
and then like 3 hours after, he's just like, "Damn."
Yeah, no, it's pretty wild.
yeah,
I think it was like they had just invested so much in the idea of Biden being their boy, despite all the obvious signs that you know even if you agreed with all of his policies, looking at him, he was not like the ideal candidate in his current state. So
yeah. I think
yes,
I mean
this checks.
we don't generally spend an enormous amount of time talking about electoral politics on here, and as frustrating as it is to just come back around to the very like liberal take of like it just matters if they beat Trump. In some senses, it does, right? Like it's gonna be fucking awful for a lot of people, for people of color, for women, for queer people, for the working class, for just everybody. If like this extremely obviously fascist as opposed to politely fascist administration gets in, and I don't know. Yeah, I mean yes, I hope that Project 2025 doesn't happen and all this shit. But like with the assassination attempt, like and with Biden just making like just so continually shitting the bed figuratively as well as probably literally, I've heard from an anonymous source like that we don't know that they can beat Trump at this point, and it like just like you're saying they're throwing shit at the wall, and I think that's the only thing that we're all wondering about is just like if it's going to actually be able to do anything to stop that happening.
Yeah. It is surely the wildest election cycle that we've had for a long time. Well, American election cycle. Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting one to see. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure we'll get some great memes out of it, but yeah, hopefully not so many war crimes.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing, right? Like will it yeah, I guess the other thing that has occurred to me and is pressing to say is like the the Democrats have a huge opportunity here to make the election somewhat about Palestine, like even a little
Yeah.
bit about Palestine. If they could find a candidate who was not as bloodthirsty for the absolute eradication of the Palestinian people as Joe Biden, then they could actually win over an enormous share of voters who like currently are probably just not going to vote at all because they've been protesting against the establishment backing the genocide. And like and I'm not even saying, because they're just not going to be able to find someone who in American politics who does not want Palestinians dead, right? But just someone who is like, let's kill them slower, right? Like they could actually win over like quite a lot of people.
Literally, the only person that I am aware of is Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, who she was arrested at a pro-Palestinian rally, and she also has a really good position on like sister and foster and like sex work and things like that. But
shocking heel turn by Jill Stein. She defects to the Democrats and becomes president.
Exactly. Like that's the thing. It's like a Green Party nominee is like, it's just it's very outside the realm of what I would say is possible.
My only other note from American politics this week was, I don't know if you saw, but this is so off topic, but I don't know if you saw, but Grindr announced publicly with receipts, they show that this was true, that the biggest reason their app crashes regularly is because of the Republican National Convention. When the GOP convention happens, it brings too many people with Grindr together in the same location, and it causes a system-wide failure. I believe the statement said it's like our Super Bowl.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I feel like that's kind of an open secret, like, and I mean, I think it is kind of shitty when people go like, oh, all those anti-gay dudes are like secretly gay, because it has this like, it has this shitty kind of thing of being like, it's still blaming like queer people for like their own kind of like being targeted and all this kind of stuff, and it also kind of makes it out as this horrible, shameful thing. But then
I mean, even when it's done to people who are pushing those policies, like outing is a vile thing to do, like taking the private lives of people and parading it in public to a disapproving audience to make them all go, no, that's not right, when you know that it's
that has been used by activist groups like back in the day to good effect, back in like the Harvey Milk days and stuff like that. But it's a nuclear option, I would say. But I think that despite it being like kind of having shitty undertones and stuff, it is wild how often we see that idea like vindicated. It's just like, oh no, actually no, like a lot of these dudes are just
I guess when it comes, I guess the Grindr thing does make me think like the Trump's whole project, which is like very much funded by Peter Thiel and the like Silicon Valley billionaires, like is so. I mentioned Garrett Hardin earlier and like spaceship Earth, lifeboat ethics kind of logic, but like the idea that there could be a small group of people who will survive the coming calamities of like climate apocalypse, right? And like the idea that like just a very small sort of walled garden of the population could have all the benefits, and like that this is essentially the way that they want their society to function, like that the public are like foaming at the mouth, absolutely imp mode for like all the worst reactionary shit you can possibly imagine. They think that gay people should be like disintegrated by a state-funded Dr. Manhattan, but in their private lives are sucking and fucking until the cows come home, right? Like I think that in some senses the big debate of the Democrats and the Republicans is just like, is the wall of the walled garden the public-private divide of the ruling class, or is it the border of America? Like, do you get to have the privileges of being like living a life worth living because you're like in the imperial core, or because you're like ultra rich within the imperial core?
Like the ultra rich that bend the rules of reality as we know it to do terrible things. It is interesting that I've seen a lot of discussion about Peter Thiel in particular lately because he is famously a New Zealand citizen. Our National Party Prime Minister a few terms back granted him citizenship after, I think he wasn't in New Zealand at the time. I think he's only ever been here for a couple days in total, but it was can't say for sure. I can't make any claims, but it might also have something to do with John Key, that same prime minister, being the only politician referenced by name by the people that leaked the Panama Papers, something to do with the Cook Islands being a tax haven. Who can say? But yeah, one thing that I always like to point out, and I tweeted about this last night, I saw a post about it, is that Peter Thiel and these others like David Sachs and stuff, these are terrible people, not just because they have all the money to control all these things or whatever like that, but they were all actually just like real shitheads beforehand as well. Like there's this, like if you look at Thiel's publishing history before he made it rich on the internet, he was pushing out, this book, The Diversity Myth, about multiculturalism and political intolerance on campus and all this kind of stuff. Like these guys are like deeply engaged in an ideological project that is,
Yes.
it's pretty, like it is fascism. And then they got the money to do the real deal neoliberal fascism.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to dive deep into, and I wish it was like more accessible, the information on that. Maybe someone will do a big video essay about it one day. Maybe someone has plans to. We've run quite over, I think, with the news this week, so I think we should get on to the main segment. But just a quick reminder for everybody, we want to remind everyone that Red Planet is made possible by the direct support of our viewers over at patreon.com/red_planet. So please go over there and check out ways that you can support the show at different tiers and the rewards that you can get if you are interested in rewards and not just in giving us money. But Tim, you're teaching us and we are learning today. We are your students and we are so eager to learn. What are you going to tell us about?
Speaking of Peter Thiel and the National Party and many others, we are going to talk about some things that have been happening down here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Many of these things have actually been because of political groups funded directly or indirectly by people like Peter Thiel, which is, interesting, very interesting. But yeah, so what we're going to talk about today is, I think it's popped up a couple times in the news just about the kind of developing situation down here, particularly with our current coalition government. And there have been a lot of, like, from the moment they got in, they were making moves seen as like attacks on Māori. So it's kind of like framed as, they've been framing them as making everything equal again, and there's this narrative that that Māori and even other, like, Pacific groups have had it far too good for too long, and that the average, the normal New Zealanders, aka Pākehā New Zealanders,
Jesus Christ,
which is Pākehā is like New Zealand European, that they're so hard done by because of the elite Māori. Like, that's the thing that they always say, like, the elite Māori have taken over and, like, control society and get all these, like, everyone's on these gravy trains. Like, I'm not sure if you follow me on Twitter, you might have seen, if I post about something about local politics, sometimes I'll get these comments and I'll be like, "You're just sad that your gravy train is ending, get off the train," and all this kind of stuff.
This privilege narrative that's weaponized against marginalized groups is so wild. But I always, when it's against Maori people in particular, I always just remember that thing that Emmy from People Against Prisons Aotearoa told me, that, like, Maori women are the most disproportionately represented prison population in the entire world.
It's
wild. Just like, privileged Maori people, so lucky, getting everything. Like, the gravy train is nonstop.
it is a nuanced discussion because there definitely is like a privileged class of Maori, like there is with any ethnic group or whatever like that, which we'll get into a little bit later on. But yeah, but like I said, you'll see it on tweets whenever I try and talk about anything like that. They'll be like, oh, you're just, like you've been feeding at the trough and now our brave government is here to drain the swamp and kick you off. And it's like, man, like what? Like I am a working class tattoo artist. I'm the son of a factory worker and a mechanic, I'm like I've never seen this trough, this gravy train, whatever, or like yeah, I don't know. It's pretty wild, but there's this narrative that they're changing things around. They're draining the swamp. They're kicking out all these privileged Maori kind of like these imaginary oligarchs or whatever, and they're going to replace them with I don't know like freaking farmers wearing gumboots that with pure Aryan ancestry or something like that. But yeah, so that's kind of weird. That's the narrative that's being spun at the moment. But there's it is a little bit more complicated than that. And to explain what it is, we kind of have to, because it all centers around one of our founding documents, like the Treaty of Waitangi or Te Tiriti. So yeah, it's hard to just kind of explain what the treaty is without kind of without giving a little bit of background information. But before we get into that, I'm not sure if a lot of our listeners will know exactly about how our parliament runs down here. So it's really different to the American parliamentary system. It's similar to the UK system, where we have a system called MMP, which means mixed member proportional. So we have a parliament that has a whole bunch of seats in it. And when we have an election, they're voting for the different parties, different local MPs and all this kind of stuff. But it basically, the amount of votes you get gives you a proportion of the seats in the House. And to form a government, you have to have over half the amount of seats in the House. So if you get like just under half, your party can form a coalition with another smaller party that gets you enough seats to get over the line. And so the current government, it's a coalition of the National Party, which is the normal kind of center-right, kind of just very boring. Like the two main parties in New Zealand are National and Labour. National are kind of center-right, Labour are center-left. And so National got the most votes for their party, but it wasn't enough to form a government. So they had to get together with the ACT Party, which is the like the duplicitous libertarian kind of, or like the like the fake libertarian kind of party where they're always saying they're libertarian, but then they're just like kind of actually criminalizing everything and just very libertarian shit, And then
am I right remembering they have a big like expat voter base?
They do. So yeah, so ACT are quite popular with the expats, which are just like generally like British, South African, all kinds of just general kind of like, I would say it tends to be white immigrants from other kind of like majority. I'd say it tends to be people that have moved to New Zealand for economic reasons, but not in like the refugee way or whatever. It's like British people that come to retire in New Zealand because there's some kind of schemes they can get where they can get 2 pensions and all this kind of stuff and things like that, where it's like they generally tend to be a little bit more privileged, and they'll settle in places like Tauranga, and they want to like have a retire by the beach or whatever like that. Like you go to these areas and they are like almost entirely like British and like South African. But not to cast all British and South African people with the same kind of brush, but that is a huge a huge portion of the ACT voter base. And NZ First is the other one. So NZ First is the classic like populist kind of nationalist party. Like they're further right than national, but they're pretty all over the place because they're led by Winston Peters, who kind of just says whatever as long as he stays relevant. He's probably like, he's been involved in New Zealand politics for decades. Is just a guy that like they wake up like just before the election every time, and he says a bunch of inflammatory stuff, gets paid $200,000 to just kind of keep on ticking for a few more years. All three of them are kind of like the Nightmare Blunt rotation of New Zealand politics. They're just, and all of their leaders are just terrible and like spineless people that will say whatever for money, and they have a reputation for doing so. On the other side of things, we have the Labour Party, which is centre left, who are better than National, but they still just they tend to get in and just don't do anything. Like they don't. Well, they have done bad things, particularly to Māori in the past, but I would say national are typically antagonistic towards like the Green Party and Te Pāti Māori, but Labour try to stay on their side a little bit better, but can also be quite antagonistic in the way that Liberal parties often are with parties further left than them.
I feel like parties like Labour, especially when they were under Ardern, like have a specific role in the radicalization of a lot of leftists, where it's just like definitely. Because they often wind up being like the best that electoral politics have to offer. They're almost like, holy shit, it's too good to be true. They could be really, really good for stuff, and they get in, they do absolutely fucking none of what they promised.
Yeah.
And then you realize actually like how little and meager those promises really were compared to just like the basic things that you think people deserve if you just like had a conversation with anyone about life as opposed to like politics, right? And it's just like it makes you break out of that mindset.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that their first introduction to politics was, like doing like some volunteer stuff for the Labour Party. And then by the next election, they were like literally like members of the Greens or Te Pāti Māori. So yeah, it is like, it's the entry point for a lot of people. So that's Labour. The Green Party is like, it's a Green Party. Most places around the world have a very similar one. They do have kind of a neoliberal element that was represented by their former co-leader, James Shaw, but he has recently been replaced. The two co-leaders at the moment, Marama Davidson, who's awesome. She's been around forever. I'm not sure if anyone remembers, there was a peace flotilla to Gaza years ago that she was on. She was arrested for that. So, she's pretty based. She's always been about it. And then Chloe Swarbrick, who is kind of a young firebrand of the party, who is, she's also pretty cool. Like as far as within electoral politics goes, I think those two together are some of our most kind of like within the institution, they are some of our most radical politicians at the moment. Beyond that, I think there are people involved. There are people in Te Pāti Māori that I think have maybe more extreme positions on some things, but don't have as much of an overall cohesive ideological framework to work from. But so then Te Pāti Māori, they're the Māori Party, as distinct from so they are a political party run by Māori for Māori interests, but they are not we have a Māori electoral roll and everything like that. So they don't by default, like they're not the representatives of all Māori by default. It's just that like they're just a political party like anyone else. That just happens that they, like their whole thing is about Māori interests. So I have to be very clear with that, because there is there's a lot of conflation between, like, people will say that they are, like they represent all Maori, or that they are like some kind of official representative of all of us in, politics and all this kind of stuff, which is just like, I think it is convenient for a lot of people politically, especially on the right, to kind of say that and to kind of conflate that at some point. But we have to have that distinction between, like, these guys are a political party and we are aligned with them on, like, most Maori people, are aligned with them on a lot of things and stuff. But there is no singular party that represents all of us or whatever. They tend to be about as far left as the Green Party, but they just focus, all of their stuff is just focused particularly on representing, Maori views and culture and everything like that in Parliament, and making sure that the treaty is respected and all of that kind of stuff. So they're really good on a lot of things, but I think they're a great opposition party, because even when they like, I think even when given the opportunity to actually be in government, and when they have kind of sat in Parliament and all that kind of stuff, in coalitions with like Labour and Greens and all that kind of stuff, they are always quite antagonistic towards Labour and everything, which I think is really good. Like, even when they are part of the government, they can act almost in opposition to it, because when you look at it realistically, the Pākehā government is in an antagonistic position to Maori. So
Of
it's their
course.
job to kind of, hold them to account, which I actually really like about the party. I think that's a great role for them to have. And there's like one of the co-leaders, as mentioned a while back, Rawiri Waititi said, he's like, everything Māori have ever achieved has been in opposition. It's like, yes, that's absolutely true, and I
That's a
think that
great
it's
line.
good to remember that. So
How does
yeah,
this, incidentally, I'm aware that there are some parliamentary seats which are, I don't know if you mentioned this earlier while I was in the bathroom. I'm aware there are some parliamentary seats that are reserved for Maori
yes.
people. Are these
So
are these filled by
yeah,
the Maori Party often or at all? Or
that's why I have to make the distinction, because we
yeah,
have this thing called Maori wards, and so that is when they're kind of like electorates that can be filled by a Maori politician. It's a separate role to the normal kind of electoral roles, and you so it's like it's not the same as like a normal parliamentary MP seat sort of thing. It's more like being like a local MP for an area, but it's for an area usually kind of usually based on kind of like tribal kind of area, tribal territory sort of thing. So there's like, there's one, like the one that I'm a part of is for Te Tai Tokoro. So that's most of the Upper North Island. And that's because most of it is all kind of a lot of it is Ngāpuhi tribal territory, but there's other tribes around there, like Ngāti Kuri, Te Aupuri, and stuff that we all have like relations to. So it's kind of like you're voting for a local MP to represent you in that area, someone that knows the area, because a lot of it is to do with kind of protecting Maori interests in that area, and also like a lot of environmental kind of stuff, like the idea is that if someone is looking for permission to, to be like mining or deep sea drilling or something like that, that when there is some kind of like negotiation or talk about it, that the local representative, so like the Maori MP, would be able to in an official capacity represent the interests of all, like like the local people in that area that have like like a tribal history in that area or something like that. A lot of the time people would also talk directly to any actual kind of like tribal groups involved in the area, but that the whoever is whoever has that seat in the Maori ward in the area would be like their like parliament's kind of, I guess, representative in that area. So it's kind of like, we'll come back to a little bit of that kind of stuff later, because the Māori wards is something that the current government is actually trying to disestablish. But so that's kind of how our government works, right? So we've got this coalition in at the moment: National, ACT, and NZ First. The three, the Nightmare Blunt rotation. And as soon as they got in, they started basically like right off the go. Some of their very first policy was like changing the names of government institutions to remove the Māori part of the name, or like things like that, just like weird little things like that for some reason was really important for them to just put through immediately, instead of like like any other
It's that
normal
very
kind of
like
stuff.
Trump or Farage brained kind of move where like you can really see not only that someone's electoral base, but also like just like the people in the party themselves are just like
Yeah.
60-plus-year-old guys who think that
Yeah.
like there being like diversity is the literal like end of the world. This is literally
Yeah.
1967 George Orwell Animal Crossing.
Yeah, and it's like, I think it's like, for them it was a signal, it was like them getting in and like saying to their base like, this is the plan. And since then it's kind of like, they've just kept going with a bunch of other stuff. But a lot of it is to do with our one of our founding documents, the Treaty of Waitangi. So this is like a bit of a history lesson. We're going back, but I think it's kind of important to, because a lot of people don't actually understand what it is, what it means. So so it's a document that was signed in 1840 between representatives from the Crown. So a lot of the time when we're talking about like like anything to do with treaty law or anything like that, we're usually talking about like between the signatories, like the chiefs that from it was North Island chiefs that signed it, and the Crown. So it's like versus the Crown. So a lot of the time, instead of saying like the government or whatever, it'll be like the Crown's interests, representatives of the Crown and stuff. So it basically set up the legal framework for the relationship, like the official legal relationships between the Crown and Māori, and laid the groundwork for what would become British colonial governance in New Zealand. So it's, a lot of people are under the impression that like you get these like return kind of fascist types that are like, like they signed the treaty, we beat them into submission and they signed the treaty and all this kind of stuff, which is kind of ridiculous. Because so at the time, it was actually, they signed before the New Zealand wars and everything like that. At the time, European settlers were like an extreme minority. There was like barely any of them, but they were running riot because they had basically, a lot of these settlers
Because
were
white people are savages.
yeah, but it was so the British deliberately sent people that they saw as troublemakers out to New Zealand. And so this was actually a lot of disenfranchised Irish and Scottish people and stuff. Like like my family history is like Māori and Scottish, because they were just basically like, these people, these working class people in England are actually causing a lot of trouble. They're fucking unionizing. They're doing all this kind of stuff, but we can send them out there to be someone else's problem. Well, it's not so much to be someone else's problem, but basically they needed to create a new class over in New Zealand to kind of, to set up and establish a state there. So they sent people under the supervision of people that obviously were, like British kind of like upper class people. They sent a lot of lower class, working class people out to the periphery to become the foundation of the new bourgeoisie, and it worked. As soon as they got there, there was good portions of the settlers actually we actually really get along with the locals here. Their way of life is really great, and just kind of assimilated. You see that a lot with there's like a lot of like Yugoslavian immigrants. There was like a huge kind of like hybrid culture up north. that was, like, and this is like years later when it came around to World War One and stuff, there was like Maori soldiers going over to Europe and being able to speak like Croatian and things like that fluently because, they had this hybrid culture. But the crown kept going like, wait, no, like we need to, like you guys should be kind of taken over down there. Like we'll send more people, we'll send more, whatever like that. And it just kind of became like the Wild West. And so a lot of these settlers were going wild because there was no legal framework. Whatever they did there, they couldn't be punished for it. There was no courts, there was no police.
Yeah, this reminds me of like when Graeber was talking about people who, like, I think it's in The Dawn of Everything. David Graeber talks about the people who were taken from it, like in the American like frontier, like people who were indigenous and then were taken into white settler society and then had the chance to choose or had the chance to escape or whatever, versus people who wound up living, who were like white settlers and then wound up living with Native Americans, like, and then had the chance to choose. Like, doing a brief survey of the cases that are happening, you just see people choosing to live with indigenous people and in their society and their way of life, basically every time.
Yeah, no, totally. And there was a lot of places where it was just totally chill. But but we did get like, there was a lot of stuff where, people were just coming in, running riot, doing kind of really hectic, really gnarly stuff. And also just there was, so the traditional Maori conception of land ownership is communal, right? Like, so there's kind of a kind of understanding where a lot of people say like there was no traditional concept of land ownership. It's like, well, there was, but it just wasn't individual land ownership. So it was like a hapu, like, like a small tribe would have territory and they'd be like, okay, from, like the edge of this mountain to this forest or whatever like that, that is us. And we all collectively own that and, maintain it, sort of thing like that. And, there would be like conflicts about like whose territory went where, whatever, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But then when Europeans showed up, they were often like, okay, cool, I'm going to farm here. Who do I talk to about that? And they would be like, oh, okay, well, you can talk to, this person who is from that tribe. And they'd go and they'd be like, hey, can I farm here? I'll give you these baubles or whatever like that. And so the idea was that that would be perceived as like a, hey, can I just like live on these lands and farm them and, grow food and all this kind of stuff like that, without the idea of it being like, oh, you're permanently buying this thing. Like this is going to be yours, like, so obviously this led to immediate tensions and conflicts. And then kind of like, it's the same kind of thing that happened with the Native Americans where, like these Europeans were like, oh man, they're selling me stuff, but then saying it's not mine, and all this kind of stuff, which leads to a bunch of kind of shitty stuff happening, where it was just like a fundamental philosophical difference about what, about, like the commodification of land and all this kind of stuff. And sadly, Maori were often kind of like, even though being the majority, they were often disadvantaged in these transactions because like there were militias with guns that had come over with these, with the settlers and stuff. And it would be just like, okay, well, cool. Well, we're just going to like bust out some muskets and like kind of enforce our property rights. And so, all kinds of stuff like that. There was particular areas like up north where just kind of like, they say they were calling it like the hellhole of the Pacific. That's like particularly like the place where my family is from was like the hellhole of the Pacific, and so it was a really wild time. So on the Maori side, even though they were the vast majority and kind of wielded a lot of the control, they were like, we need something to keep these settlers in line. We need to speak to their representatives and we need to make sure that they, like there is some kind of like system to stop them from just running rampant and doing all this wild stuff. And then the British, on the other hand, were like, we need to assert sovereignty over this country to protect our interests there and our burgeoning kind of like, industries and all these kind of things. And particularly also there were a lot of other imperial entities that were looking at, I guess, kind of like carving up their own chunk of Aotearoa. Particularly the French were kind of like on the doorstep, and the British were like, no, we need to make this, like part of our empire. So the treaty was drafted, and a bunch of North Island chiefs got together and signed it with representatives of the crown. But the problem is, a lot of these chiefs weren't speaking English at the time. So they signed one version, which we call Treaty of Waitangi, and then the English signed another version, the Treaty of Waitangi, which was in English. And not only are these documents quite different, not even just by like a bad translation, even though that does have a lot to do with it, but there are a lot of terms used in them that there's no one-to-one translation for them. So there's like huge misunderstandings about what they mean. And since then, there has been, like, particularly over the last sort of like 60 years or so, there has been a huge move to actually kind of, there's been like the development of what we call treaty law, and the way to actually legally define and just like lock it in and be like, this is what this means. We like, it's incorporated into basically all levels of law in our country now. And it's kind of seen as like on the Māori side, it's kind of been like, okay, we've finally codified what what it was supposed to be, like what we signed up for all those years ago. We've finally locked it in and agreed, and now they can't keep fucking us over, and we can start to get some redress for things that, breaches of the treaty after it was signed. Whereas on the side of the current coalition government, they're saying we gave up too much with this treaty. We signed away things that weren't in the original agreement, and now we need to make it even again by, by kind of, they want to remove all references to the treaty in legislation in New Zealand. So some examples of like there's 3 main articles in the treaty, right? In the English version, Article 1 basically says that Māori cede sovereignty to the British Crown. So they're just basically being like, okay, even though we are the vast majority here by thousands or whatever like that, we control all these lands, there's only a handful of these settlers, we're letting their representative be our boss. Whereas in the Māori version, the chiefs grant the crown governance, which they used the word kawanatanga, which was a new word at the time, which was the equivalent of governance, which is governance is not sovereignty, and then so they were granting governance over British affairs and and subjects in
That
the
is
area.
some sneaky rat fuck shit right there.
Yeah. So it's not sovereignty. No chief was ever under the idea that they were ceding sovereignty in any way. Then Article 2 is, in the English version, it guarantees Māori full, exclusive, and undisturbed possession of their lands, forests, fisheries, and other properties, while giving the Crown the exclusive right to purchase land. So this is where, we first start solidifying the idea that, like, okay, cool, like, they own their land, but if they want to sell it, they have to, like, the Crown can buy it off them. And then, but in the same version, in the Māori version, it guarantees what we call tino rangatiratanga, which means full authority. So that's complete sovereignty over all of Māori land, homes, and then also another word, taonga, which is sometimes referred to as treasures, but the kind of Māori worldview doesn't just limit that to physical treasures. So that also includes cultural things like, like our language and art and all this kind of things like that. So
And
so
the
that's
black, white, and red flag is the Tino
yes,
Rangatiratanga flag.
yeah. So that's a flag that was it's not that's quite recent. Like I think that was like made in like the 80s or 90s, but as like this kind of like symbol of like like Maori sovereignty, basically. And then in Article 3, both versions promise Maori the rights and privileges of British subjects, ensuring equal protection under British law. So that basically meant that like any laws that protect British citizens, like like you can't just go and kill a British person or whatever like that, that Maori would also
Should
kind
be
of de
able to, though.
facto. So it just basically meant that they were protected from that as well, so it meant that like any British law that, said you can't rob and steal and do all this kind of stuff, that it didn't just mean you can't do that to another European person in this country. So it's pretty simple. But so after they signed the treaty, and then almost immediately it started getting broken, and particularly around like land claims and stuff like that. So that's when we got into the various wars and things that happened. There's like what is there? There's like the Waiarawa Fray, the Northern War, the First Taranaki War, the Waikato War, the Second Taranaki War, the New Zealand Wars, which was like about 10 years or so of like various conflicts all over the place, and all these kind of things, which through this process, more and more land was stolen each time. And this is when we get into like the actual, like the physical,
more sneaky rat fuck shit, basically.
yeah. And like there's like sneaky stuff, like they made a law that meant they could seize any land that was held by people that were working to like rebel against the state, and then they just basically started calling everyone rebels and seizing their land.
Well, when the state is existing to like
Exactly,
as you say, like
yeah.
in opposition to the Maori people, like God,
Yeah.
that's fucking.
But this is
it's
also
just,
when
this compared to the claim that like we beat them, then they signed the treaty as some kind of surrender
exactly.
by these fascists. It's like I suddenly find the like conspiracy theory ancient aliens guys who think that like Noah's Ark landed in New Zealand and put white people there before Maori people. I suddenly find them like more plausible than of the fascist alternatives.
Yeah. And in a lot of these wars, it was like some of these wars, it was kind of like a little bit inconclusive as to who really kind of came up better. Some of them, it was like there was like this is where we got to some of the really like gnarly genocidal stuff, where we had like literally just like British ships just rolling up on coastal settlements and just like blasting them with cannon fire, things like that. There was like non-combatant settlements where it was just like everyone that wasn't fighting, like women and children and elderly and stuff, just getting torched in the middle of the night, all this kind of stuff. Despite this, like Maori were like putting up a fight that actually like the British weren't finding it easy, and a lot of times they were getting their ass handed to them. So it was kind of like this thing where the end of the New Zealand wars kind of came about when it was like this, like the fighting had gone on for so long and so many had been hurt that it was kind of this like uneasy truce. But then they continued with that's also when there were some of the largest confiscations of land. But at the time, a lot of leaders were like, we can put up with that to just end the fighting. But it was still like these were like illegal confiscations and all these kind of things. There was a New Zealand Settlements Act that was like 1863, I think it was, which was one of the biggest widespread land confiscations, and that was towards the start of the New Zealand Wars. but yeah, so it was just like this constant warfare and land confiscation and just like kind of like a tug of war going back and forth, but every time losing a little bit more land.
It's the nature of imperialism, right? Is that
Yeah,
like empires can actually afford to take just a ridiculous number of L's because they have so many
yeah,
people and so many resources, and then the people that they're fighting lose like less, like
yeah,
objectively less times, and still
yeah, yeah.
get conquered because
Well,
they
yeah,
can just
yeah,
keep
that's the
flooding
thing,
them.
right? Like it's when we think about um the like we have so there's like the idea of like the Maori tribe, like the Hapu, which is like a, like a kind of tribal village kind of group, and then there's like the iwi, which is like the wider kind of like I think of it more of like a nation or like an alliance of Hapu, alliance of tribes. But a lot of people will just say an iwi is like a tribe, but I think it's more like an alliance or yeah, like a nation of a bunch of tribal groups. When you think about how tight and small a lot of these groups are, where it's kind of like, okay, cool, like they can afford to throw like 100 soldiers out here because there's 100 more on a boat. But when you think about there's like a tribe that might be only 1,000 people, and it's like 100 of them to die is like cataclysmic, especially when it's like, all your like cousins and second cousin, all these kind of things like that, where it's like these are people that you've grown up around your whole life. Whereas like some British general is just going to be like, I didn't go to the same school as these guys, like um so yeah, so that was like a huge thing, whatever. And and these illegal lands confiscations carried on all the way up into recent history. And yeah, so after these wars, everyone kind of like there's this the New Zealand kind of like cultural consensus is that like that's when we finally like racism ended and peace began, which is like no, that's when that's when the outright genocide ended, and that's when um and that's when like all these kind of like assimilationist policies and things like that started happening, which also became things like like punishing people for doing traditional practices, from everything from like traditional medicine to language to yeah, like traditional tattooing and everything like that. We had a bunch of bills and acts and laws passed that forbid people from doing various things. I mean, even up to like like my even into my parents and grandparents' generations, both still being like punished and like hit at school for speaking Maori or like anything like that. That happened all the way up until like the 60s and 70s over here. Um, and so in the in 1975, there was the Treaty of Waitangi Act. So that was when they established the Waitangi Tribunal, which is basically a court that is set up to address historic and contemporary grievances by Maori against the crown. So this is basically when they could look back at history and be like, hey, look, we signed that treaty and then you violated it at this point by doing this. This is, we're going to go to court and we're going to like kind of we're going to figure out some way of redressing it, or even just to substantiate these claims, make sure it's legit, all this kind of stuff. So this is literally like there's a Pākehā system, and this is Maori going to that system and being like, okay, cool, we're going to go through your system and we're going to prove this. And this is where all like the treaty law stuff has really come out and kind of like, it's that kind of thing, the classic thing, what they tried to do. We've talked about it before, what Stephen Donziger witnessed over in Brazil and stuff, where they did all these things to the native population, and they said, well, hey, if you don't like it, like sue us, take us to court, show us what we've done wrong. And then they did, and then they were like successful. This is the same kind of thing, right? Being like, okay, cool, well, now we've had a few generations, we've our kids have learned, like they've learned about the law, they've learned about your law, and now we're gonna see how that shakes out. And so that's when it really started. Like there was not just this kind of like I guess like a cultural renaissance where it was kind of like, this is when we're getting big, booming kind of movements that were led by Māori activists to kind of like revitalize like language, arts, culture, all these kind of things, but also just to be like, okay, and we're going to get some of our land back, or like for things that aren't based on land, or even for land that is impossible to get back, get some kind of like redress, like get some money to kind of, like to make it right. And so that led to, a bunch of tribes getting good portions of confiscated land returned, or sometimes the land would be unable to be returned because something else had happened there or whatever, and they're like, well, we can't just demolish a city and give it back to you or whatever. So they would calculate an amount of money that to pay back to this tribe. And I've never heard of a settlement that was for more than like 1% of the actual value of the land. Like it's always nothing, it's like it's absolutely nothing. But some of these tribes were actually able to take these settlements or like regain this land and kind of create booming communities and set up like some really amazing kind of initiatives. Particular, there's like Ngāti Whātua Oraki, who most of downtown Auckland was their land. They gifted a small portion of it to the Crown and said, okay, you guys can build like your little waterfront and stuff there, but this is our land next to it. And then the Crown kind of just went, well, we'll just get some of that too, and all that kind of stuff. And they eventually were able to go to the tribunal and get and be redressed for that, get some of the land back, and also to be paid for the land that was unfairly taken from them. And with that, they've done everything from like community housing to like really amazing public services and just like all kinds of stuff that has really allowed their tribe to just flourish. There's still a lot of tribes, including my own, that still hasn't got a settlement. They're still waiting for it. And the worry is that this current coalition, with a lot of stuff they're doing, is that they'll actually try and thwart any future, like settlements or anything like that, because it's kind of getting to the point where it's like some of the last ones to come through, like the Ngāpuhi settlement, these are big settlements, and no government wants to be the one that has to pay that out of their budget, right? So that's that is a big worry, that there are a lot of people there that would be left kind of just permanently kind of let down by this whole system, because the current coalition government is kind of cracking down on a lot of things that are like, I guess, like in general, just like affirmative action things for past problems. So that's what the treaty is, and that's what the tribunal is, and everything like that. And like I said, it is kind of, it's in every level of our law now. There are references to the treaty. It's a huge thing. But this current coalition, they have like they've got a plan to remove all references to the treaty in legislation as much as they can. And it's been even admitted by some of their own politicians that this isn't probably entirely possible. I mean, it would be a huge dramatic kind of change in New Zealand law. But there's a couple things in particular that they've already started to do that are clear breaches of the treaty. There's things like a couple years ago, we set up a Māori health authority, because typically Māori are disadvantaged in a lot of like kind of like health outcomes, everything like that. So this authority was set up to be like, okay, cool, like this is like a special government initiative that we're actually going to try and solve a lot of these things, particularly in like like poorer Māori communities. So that was like made in 2022. One of the first things that this government has come in has been like, yeah, we're going to scrap that because it's actually racist, because it's not there for white people.
Oh my god.
So
those like poorer outcomes for Maori people, are those more down to like, I don't know about more. I guess I'm asking what combination of like access to like lower access to healthcare versus
Yeah.
like other factors that are causing poorer health there are, like, you know?
There's a whole bunch of stuff, but yeah, poorer access, underserved communities, like a lot of like rural Maori communities just don't have doctors or anything like that because of some other reasons that I'll get into, but also just things like, you know, like institutional racism from medical professionals, because you get like the majority of doctors and nurses and stuff historically have not been Maori, and it's the same thing that a lot of other Pacific Island communities in Aotearoa also suffer from. So yeah, there have been there's in the past, we've had a lot of kind of pathways into higher education established for Maori, with the intention of being like, okay, cool, well, this is a community that is underserved by medical professionals. So if these people from these rural communities are coming to, you know, the cities to go to university to learn about medicine, to go back and serve their communities, that's a good thing, right? That solves that problem. It solves the double thing of getting more Maori into you know, into the medical profession, into other kind of useful professions, which we have like a huge lack of, you know, like even just like doctors in general. But it also fills that gap in that community where it's like they are having worse health outcomes because they don't have, you know, they don't have someone that kind of understands them and lives in that community and knows kind of what their needs are. And then yeah, so but they're trying to remove a lot of those pathways now, so because that's also seen as racist to you know, it's like these affirmative action policies where they're like, okay, we have barely any Maori doctors, we need to get more in. But then, you know, you get these kids going like, oh, you get these people online on Twitter being like, my genius white daughter was, you know, turned down from med school because they had to fill the diversity seats or whatever like that. And then when you actually look into it, it's like, oh well, no, it's actually because they just didn't do very well. You know, like there's no system at play that is gonna turn down a good scoring kid to university. You know, it's just like, yeah, it's ridiculous. And anyway, a lot of these placements for Maori and Pacifica students are not, like, they were established with extra government funding to be extra seats as opposed to taking up a seat that was already there, right? So it's like, it's not that they're saying like, okay, this is a, you know, like we can only have a class of 10 and 2 of those are reserved. It's like we had a class of 10, but now we're funding 2 extra to get more. And, you know, it's like that kind of thing. It's like just basic affirmative action stuff. And then they're like, okay, well, how come those extra 2 seats can't be white kids too, you know? So, so yeah, so that leads to poorer health outcomes. And it also, I mean, this also affects other things like the legal profession and all this kind of stuff, because there are fewer Maori in getting into those industries because of, you know, like, you know, because it's hugely expensive. There's a limit to how many years you can borrow for a student loan. So if you're a poor working class person, you kind of need some kind of scholarship kind of stuff. And it's just like a lot of the bad outcomes also tied just to being you know, poor working class people. And it's just, it's more common for Maori to be disenfranchised in that way because of historic kind of, you know, material kind of issues that have led to their disenfranchisement. So it's you know, it's not just because, you know, like a lot of people go like, oh, why you know, why don't they get into school? Is it because they're lazy or whatever? You know, and it's like, well, no, there's like there is a very material history of, you know, like things that have led to their disenfranchisement, which, you know, like things have consequences, right? It's basic stuff. So yeah, so that's some of the stuff we started out with. They've also the Maori wards that we were talking about earlier, they want to disestablish those, which would mean that, like, at the moment, to establish one, it basically just comes down to the local council in the area. They were like, yeah, it was just like a vote that you could have in, in an area and be like, okay, yeah, cool, we want to establish one of these. And all the local people and stuff were like, yeah, cool, sweet, let's do it, blah, blah, blah. And so the government was saying this took power away from local councils and gave it to these, these scary race-based kind of, positions. Whereas in reality, a lot of it was like local communities being like, no, actually, that does sound great. We would love to be represented in that way. So they were initially like, we're just going to get rid of them because they're undemocratic. So we're just going to completely get rid of these things that were voted into existence. But I think it's been backpedaled to now it has to be like these local councils have to have another vote to see whether they will keep them or not. If this had been years ago, I think it would have been easy. They would have been voted to keep them, but this current coalition government has pushed, and their, their kind of the think tanks that are on their side have pushed so much like racism around this particular issue that now it's kind of like, I'm unsure. Like some of them will definitely go. I'd like to think that a lot of them will stay, but who knows? It's particularly because in the last election, Te Pāti Māori absolutely swept like almost all of them. Like in the past, there'd been a lot of like Labour and even some national politicians that had held the wards, but this was just like almost like a completely clean sweep this time. So that the building of political power in that area, I think, really scared the current coalition. They're just like, damn, we got to get rid of these if we can.
Clearly.
But also because they the Māori wards, the people that are elected to them also have some kind of insight and say over environmental policies and like things that are happening in their local area. Like I was talking about earlier with like extractive industries and stuff, which is something that NZ First, the kind of populist nationalist party, have made it very clear from the start that they want to ramp up mining, deep sea drilling, all these kind of things that we have had limits and regulations on. They want to cut back a lot of those regulations because they're saying this will bring jobs to New Zealand and all this kind of stuff. But it's these offshore companies that are going to come and destroy our country, ship the resources out where other people are going to make a whole lot of money. I mean, I'm sure NZ First will be very happy with what they've already got from their donors and what they will continue to get. But for the average New Zealander, this is going to make things a lot worse. And it's also just going to destroy our environment. And even some of the areas that they are opening up are like, full of endangered animals and just, like all the kind of stuff that is like the, all the kind of things that like that Māori generally want to protect, like the natural environment, all those kind of things. So the Māori wards are kind of, they're a threat to that, right? Like they're, like having this this extra little bit of political power just for Māori in a lot of these areas is a potential for pushback on that. And to do a lot of this kind of stuff, the current government has been pushing through a lot of bills under urgency, which is supposed to be like, it's a thing that started happening like with COVID, right? Like the government was like, okay, we need to do a bunch of things to protect people. So we're pushing through these bills in urgency, which then now the current government has gone like, well, they've set a precedent for it. So now we can do it, except it's for doing all this kind of shitty stuff. And one of the things that they're pushing through is the fast track.
It's urgent. Bill. I need to be racist right now.
Yeah. Well, so this one they're working on, the fast track approvals bill, is basically if there is a project that normally would require a lot of approval by, various people in all kinds of different, areas or whatever, like instead it will be able to be fast tracked by it's like 3 or 4 different ministers will be able to sign off on it. They're all ministers from, you know, like they're all people from the current coalition government that have like insane histories as lobbyists, just, you know, like just terrible corporate lobbyists turned politician types that will be able to just, yeah, totally open up areas for mining and all this kind of stuff, which is like, it's a huge threat because it's super undemocratic. So they're rushing through a bill that will allow them to, in the future, just rush through anything they want without public consultation, without Māori local consultation, anything like that. It's just straight up like they, you know, like buy a piece of land and immediately start mining on it. You know, it's pretty horrific. And it's like one of those things where once we open up that can and let these corporations in to start doing this kind of stuff, you can't just stop it then. If you stop it, those corporations start suing the government. They start, you know, doing all this kind of stuff. So that for me is one of the biggest issues with this, because this is the real kind of you know, this is the pipeline stuff. Like this is where the country really starts getting kind of cracked open like a can of sardines for the petrochemical billionaires, you know. Aside from those, there are also the current coalition has a lot of other policies that are just objectively really terrible. One of them is NZ First, are super transphobic, and have started trying to push their version of like the bathroom bills and like, you know, the women's and sports things. The sports thing has almost entirely been shot down because they basically were like, we're going to make sure it's fair for, you know, like people, you know, in like community sports, that they're not being beat out by like, you know, trans people that are doing it like disingenuously or whatever. And almost all the local sporting bodies and regulatory bodies were just like, we actually, like, this conversation has been going on for ages, we're actually super comfortable with like letting people just kind of, you know, like they have things where it's like, well, you know, like they were basically like, this is why we have weight classes and this is why we have regulations about, you know, like for some sports they already test hormone levels and they say like, oh yeah, you know, you can compete, but you know, like whatever, all this kind of stuff. And it just kind of showed that the politicians in charge were using it as a culture war thing, and they actually had no idea. Like they don't care about women's sports. They've never been involved in any of this kind of stuff, which was kind of like embarrassing for them, which I thought was probably not like, the media didn't really focus on that at all. They just kind of moved on. Whereas I think it's like, it should be important for them to be like, actually, no, like what the government is saying is just culture war, transphobic bullshit. And all the people that are actually involved in this stuff have largely found that it's just like not even an issue, you know? Like there was, they were getting statements from these like provincial soccer clubs.
That's a bit like the like affirmative action, the racist fearmongering about like my genius white daughter isn't getting a place at the
Yeah.
It's like in the same way you'll have like this like 14th place athlete who's a turf being like, the 13th place went to a trans woman, clearly they have a biological advantage. Like, you're both losers, I'm sorry, babe. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like but yeah, so yeah, like I mean, it's like NZ First love that kind of shit, and they're trying to introduce a bathroom bill, which is like ridiculous and also totally unenforceable as well. It's like, but it's the kind of thing where they, you know, like when they've been questioned about it, like, how are you going to enforce this, blah blah blah, like that, and basically they're just saying, oh well, you know, businesses will have to enforce it or whatever. And they're basically just trying to empower, you know, just like little small business Hitlerite turfs to, you know, kind of become the poo poo pee pee police, which is like, you know, it's just ridiculous. Like no one's gonna, yeah, like I mean,
I think it's because Mule loves Norm so much, but I don't know when Hitlerite became such a popular term on this show.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's small business Hitlerite pops into my head all the time. Being a member of the K Road Business Neighborhood Watch security group, I am often thinking about small business Hitlerites. But so NZ first, terrible transphobic stuff. And so the Green Party have come out hard against this kind of stuff. Labour against it, and Te Pari Māori have also said that they, like they're against it. They stand with all trans, and we have a term takatapui, which means like it's kind of like a blanket term for queer. But it's like kind of like a queer indigenous kind of identity sort of thing. And they say that, like they won't stand for attacks on, like the Takatapui community. But I would say that the Greens Party are the only ones that have really solid actual policy. Like they're the ones that are like, and this is because they've been around for years doing this kind of stuff, and it's like very embedded in their party that to push back against this kind of stuff. Te Pari Māori have, like obviously made a lot of statements about it, but they have kind of like, I would say like a gap in their policy about when it comes to kind of like queer issues and stuff. And I think this is also an interesting thing where it's like what I was saying before about Te Pari Māori not being like the be all and end all of Māori in politics, because I would say that most of like I know quite a lot of people from all of the kind of left parties, and like every Green MP or representative or like member that I know is like Maori communist, queer Maori communist, whereas like I think in the Maori Party, it's they don't have as much queer representation that is perhaps pushing them to make that policy, and they do work, both parties work together. So like it's I couldn't really imagine them being in government and not working with each other's policies on that kind of stuff. Like I think for Te Pari Māori, it's just because they don't have anyone in the party being like, hey, look, this is the specific policy that we should write. Whereas like Greens are like all about it, and they have some really they've had they do have and have in the past had some really amazing like queer activists that have worked inside the party to to kind of like work on that kind of stuff. The other thing that is also like a huge thing for me personally that the current coalition government are doing is they are bringing back the Borstal style youth camps for young offenders, which are like terrible. Everywhere in the world that they have ever had these kind of military boot camps for children has ended up in horrific abuse, particularly in New Zealand. Like the history of it is terrible. I know people, like I have good friends of mine who have like parents, like fathers that went through these systems that destroyed them. And like, this is where like even like these notorious like gangs like the mongrel mob were founded by people that were put into these particular camps and went through such like traumatic abuse that they came out the other side. And they founded a lot of these kind of gangs because they were like, we are, the state has let us down, and we are, they just kind of became, I guess, the worst version of what they could be as a person. And sometimes in direct retaliation to the state for doing that to them, sometimes just for being that hurt as a person, and really
Yeah.
just becoming
It's kind of oppositional defiance, really, isn't it? It's just like you just want kind of, I kind of think this a lot, like, so okay, there's a bit of a tangent, but like sometimes when I get hate crimed, I'm like walking down by there's a spot where like some guys go fishing in the park. And actually, to be honest, this hasn't happened in a while. It was a thing that happened to me earlier in transition a lot more. But like these guys are like, I know they are like not particularly well off, and they like some like a fair number of them are unemployed and like drinking during the day, hanging out at like fishing spot with their friends, and like they're kind of they're kind of part of a set of like British guy who like have that very kind of like British punk attitude where it's like a rejection of manners and society and everything wholesale is the
Mm.
way that you like stick it to the man, and then like being tolerant of people is also manners.
Yeah.
It's also like it's like being like being accepting and welcoming of minorities is actually just like a kind of politeness that
Yeah.
like society is trying to force onto you. And I kind of think about that sometimes as like, you know, when you've just been kind of I just basically like know maybe I'm trying too hard to be nice to people who are being horrible to me sometimes, but like
Yeah. No,
it's kind of my
I
instinct. But
definitely,
I just like
yeah.
I know that when you've been through a lot of shit, sometimes you just want to reject the whole world
Yeah,
in one go and just like fuck it, like no discernment.
that is like legitimately like a huge part of it. And I know this from, like obviously having people that are knowing people that are affected by these systems, but also just from occupationally, I kind of like, end up around a lot of bikers and know a lot of, like older bikers and biker history and all that kind of stuff. And there's a huge portion of it that just comes from being like being let down by the state. And this happens all over the world. It's not just with us with the postal system. This happened with like a lot of dudes in the UK and in America coming back from various wars and then being let down and being like, fuck it, like, and this is why where, you get like classic biker tattoos like FTW, fuck the world, come from. Or even like in New Zealand, we got like the gangs like the Mongrel Mob, who are, like overwhelmingly Maori, coming out of these borstals and tattooing swastikas on their foreheads because they were like, this is the most offensive thing that we can do. This is this
And you see that in British punk as well, and it showed up in
yeah, yeah,
French punk as well, like just like the swastika as just like we know this offends people and that's why we're doing it. And
yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, yeah. So it's like this kind of like yeah, like people that felt let down by the state doing what they can to exile themselves, to push themselves outside of society, and yeah, so a lot of people came through these borstal school, well, these camps, and ended up like that. And we have had, even just recently over the last few years, we've had the results of a landmark inquiry into abuse at these schools that was just like uncovered just like an obscene amount of child sexual abuse at these particular schools. And there's like, it's like it's so well known now. It's a matter of fact. There's been so much, so much has been kind of pulled back, and we've found, and it's like one of those things where it's like I would say for like a whole year, it was like every weekend there would be some kind of documentary special talking about it, interviewing people. It's the New Zealand public knows this, and it's not up for debate. But our current Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, said that he doesn't actually care about the statistics. He doesn't care about the science, that he's going to do this. And it's part of this kind of like tough on crime kind of thing that that National in particular always push this idea of being tough on crime. They're, like harsher sentences, these youth camps, all these kind of things, which these things disproportionately affect Maori. And I thought it was interesting that seeing they just released photos of the first of these new youth camps the other day, and the walls of the place are covered in like, it's like this kind of like bullshit Maori kind of like imagery. And like there was one room, it was like set up like one of the bedrooms had a Tino Rangatiratanga flag on the window. They had like, like Maori, like whakatoki, like kind of proverbs and stuff on the walls and shit. It's like they are making these for Maori children, like these are prisons for Maori children. And also just like the insane ideological stuff where it's like it's all tied in with the defense force and all this kind of stuff. It's like just yeah, the whole thing is disgusting, and it shouldn't have been greenlit whatsoever. And I think it's it's a really damning thing for a lot of media in New Zealand, I think, at the moment, to not be not be digging into it harder and actually kind of speaking truth to power in this way. But yeah, and so that obviously disproportionately affects Māori because we're already like, communities are already our communities are already over criminalized and over policed. Like we were saying earlier, Māori women are one of the most disproportionately imprisoned demographics in the entire world. This is just going to be, this is going to be even more of this. And it's part of that thing, right? Like, if you really want to be hard on crime, if you want to be a tough on crime government, you got to look at the things that create crime. And that is not, like punishing people for committing crimes in this kind of way is not how you stop crime. How you stop crime is addressing the stresses that push people to commit crime, like poverty, like people like, like we're in the middle of a housing crisis, we're in the middle of a food crisis, like we have a duopoly with the supermarkets that are making billions and billions of dollars every week while food prices go up and up and up, and then we're supposed to act like that doesn't lead to an increase in like shoplifting, and that doesn't lead to people doing ram raids on businesses. It's if you really want to be hard on crime, you have to be soft on the poor. You have to be really engaging with these things that are upstream of the other stuff, like all the crime, the desperation, all that kind of stuff is downstream of these social factors. And and it's just like for the current parties in power, particularly national, it's a very cynical thing just to try and get votes from New Zealanders that see the news and they see about like, the ram raids, and they see about like this kind of stuff, and to be like, oh, it's the fault of the criminals. We need to attack the victims of our policies. They're the ones that are making you unsafe. So so that's kind of where we're at the moment. To push back on a lot of this stuff, there have been huge kind of some of the biggest Maori protests that I've ever seen in my life, activated by, well, they are calling them activations by Te Pāti Māori, and usually in like with a couple days notice, like just barely any notice, mobilizing thousands and thousands and thousands of Māori across the country.
That's amazing.
Which is like, to me, I love to see this level of mobilization. I do, like, my one criticism of these activations is that I would love to see them planned better. And after the first one or two, there was some talk about being like, there's people saying like they should be engaging more with people that like people that are more, I guess, like established in the protest and like the strike space, like a lot of the unions and all that kind of stuff. And they did almost immediately start kind of talking with unions about this kind of stuff, because at first it was kind of like a little bit just like it came out of nowhere, and people were a bit like, oh shit, well, I can't actually, I can't just drop work and go do that tomorrow or whatever like that. And so a lot of people felt a little bit kind of like put out by it, because they're like, I really want to support this kind of stuff, but as a working class Māori person, I can't just tell my boss that I'm going to go do this tomorrow. So getting the unions involved is actually really good, because then they can be like, actually, this is a this is a union action now. This is like, it's much more of a like it's, I guess, like there is some precedent, and there is some, like, your boss is going to be less likely to push back and be like, hey, look. So that's been really good. And even just to show the government, the coalition government, that there is that people power that is building is really amazing. And
like,
also
we use the term demonstration, right? Because it's just like sometimes mobilizations don't do a thing on their own, but they're just like this is how many people are mad about this.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was amazing also to see that at these activations, the speakers were also they're talking about Gaza, they're talking about Sudan, they're talking about like a lot of other things that are happening around the world and linking them together. It's not just like, because there was a lot of worry when a lot of people put it out where they're like, okay, this is just going to be a big like, like vote for us kind of thing, like, because it's a political party that is organizing this, and that's why I like to stress that Te Pāti Māori while they do a really good job of advocating for Māori interests, they are a political party that is not representative of Māori as a whole, and that a lot of Māori actually, like prefer like the Greens party for various reasons or things like that. But like as a whole, they're very good and doing a lot of good work. But like, yeah, even some other criticisms have been that they like I would say not as, I guess, ideologically kind of coherent as a lot of other groups, whereas like, like they have done some amazing things. Like they actually put out a statement that they supported prison abolition, and that they said the Māori Party's goal was like New Zealand prison abolition by I think 2040, which is like amazing. Like that's sick. Like putting that
Holy
on
shit.
the table. But
I don't
like,
think I've not heard of a party involved in mainstream electoral politics anywhere that's like
exactly
saying about prison abolition. That's fucking awesome.
that's huge. But there hasn't been so much of like actual policy push forward to be like, this is how we get there, whereas I know that like the Greens Party regularly interact with groups like People Against Prisons Aotearoa, and actually like, they're like, okay, well, what policies are we actually working on now that we can get to that point? So Greens haven't actually, not that I know of, they haven't actually committed to prison abolition, but they have worked towards that goal of prison abolition already, regardless of whether that's the end point for them or not, So that's what I would personally like to see more from them, to be like, self-centered for a moment. But yeah,
I mean, I think we described this show early on as kind of like sports commentating the revolution. So I think you're giving your feedback on what they're doing is very valid. It's not.
Well, yeah. And I mean, that's like my thing. Like I truly believe that like this is still all, like electoral politics, and this is like, I feel like that beyond that is the real path to, to liberation and real like, prison abolition and stuff. But I think that, like a lot of these things that the Green Party and the Māori Party are working for are what we would describe as non-reformist reforms. They are reforms, but yeah, instead of just being these kind of like reformist kind of letting off steam kind of things, these can genuinely build power or allow people to help build power towards a real kind of an actual revolutionary movement. So yeah, so those activations have been amazing. Some of the biggest kind of most, like I would say, most positive kind of protest kind of actions that I have seen, like every time they get announced, you get these like right-wing like shock jock radio hosts saying like, this is when the race war begins, they're gonna start rounding us up and all this kind of ridiculous stuff. But then you go and it's literally just like the most like just like super positive vibes, and it's like there's never been any incidents of like violence or anything like that. It's
Of
just
course
totally,
not. Yeah. Like,
yeah,
of
yeah,
course.
totally chill. So yeah, so that's great, and want to see more of that. I would love to see more of a I would love to see Te Pāti Māori really expanding their roles. I mean, expanding their kind of foothold within the electoral system. Same with the Green Party. And I think that the Labour Party lost a lot of goodwill they did a great job in the initial phases of COVID by taking it really seriously. And, we had our lockdowns, and then towards the end, they kind of burned off a lot of political goodwill that they had, just by like not really doing a lot, and kind of squandering a lot of that goodwill that they'd built up. And I think that they have lost a lot of voters to the Greens and to Party Māori, which I think after like this current coalition is becoming so despised from the center to the left that it's only like even like center right voters have started dropping off them, that I think that next time around I would love to see like I think it's going to be another Labour Greens Maori coalition, but I would love to see a lot more seats for both Maori and Greens, and forcing Labour to actually have to make some more heavy concessions, which they absolutely could do.
Yeah,
So
fingers
yes,
crossed.
yeah. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. It's been a wild, it's maybe like 8 or 9 months since this government got in so far. It's been pretty much like they're pushing through all these really extreme things to seemingly like everything comes back to this kind of like culture war. All these other like random unrelated things, and it all just comes back to that. And I think that
it seems kind of like culture war stuff is so often like when I was saying earlier about like churning up the voting base, like that it's that in a way that's really disconnected from people's material concerns. But this seems like a place where they've kind of poked the bear, if you forgive the
I think
metaphor.
so.
Like it's kind of like they accidentally like pushed on something that they thought was like a little bit like, we'll get racists really engaged with our side.
Yeah.
And then they ended up getting like actually a massive movement pushing against them.
There has been some other, like they have been doing a lot of anti-China kind of stuff as well recently as well, which is interesting because it's there's this kind of America, UK, Australia, New Zealand alliance kind of situation that they're trying to build up in the Pacific to kind of like maintain the foothold there, whereas like China have actually been kind of coming down to the Pacific and making really attractive agreements with these small Pacific nations to kind of like China benefiting by kind of loosening the the Western foothold in the area. They're doing the same thing, like with the Belt and Road stuff, where they're like, hey, we'll lend you the money to do this stuff, like no interest, whatever, you guys just do your thing, whatever. And so our current government is kind of getting on the Western bandwagon with that and making out like it's like evil China, and that there's like all these secret evil Chinese plans in the Pacific, and that they're all trying to like undermine our democracy. In the meantime, we're seeing like American billionaires literally undermine our democracy and stuff. So there has been a lot of anti-Chinese racism in our media and stuff as well. It's like pretty wild because the current coalition, all the parties that claim that they're all about the economy and government, and like kind of like the GDP and all that kind of stuff. But China's actually like our biggest trading partner by like heaps, whereas like America and like the UK and stuff, we barely do really anything with. So and we've even had Chinese diplomats and stuff being like, hey, what are you guys doing there? Like, what's up there, and our big idiot boy Christopher Luxon, the Prime Minister, who is our he's like the CEO guy. They were like, he's our businessman, he's going to get in. And really, he's just a guy that will like say anything for money. But his former kind of credentials are like, taking big businesses and running them into the ground and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of just par for the course with him. But the sad thing is that we would be really, really fucked as a nation if we kind of alienated China to the point of them kind of renegotiating some of their trade deals. And it's this kind of wild thing where it's like, it's all just for sucking up to America even more,
Yeah.
So
Classic.
yeah, so that's another thing that was just tangentially related because there has been a lot of like anti-Maori racism, but there's also a lot of anti-Chinese racism, and there was also like a lot of like anti kind of like Arab stuff, like particularly around when
Mm.
things started happening in Gaza. It's kind of got to the point down here though where it seems like even the media is like, oh yeah, it's a genocide now. Oh yeah, there's apartheid now,
Mm.
and trying to, I guess, trying to soften the blow a little bit. Whereas initially it was very much like, our great ally in Israel. That like I don't know what Israel have ever done for New Zealand aside from we've caught a bunch of their spies doing really weird stuff here a couple times. There's like John Key
Absolute
had a
classic.
after the Christchurch earthquake, we found a bunch of Israeli spies in the exclusion zone with a bunch of stolen passports, and the SAS caught them, and then John Key had a quick four phone calls with Netanyahu on that day, and then told everyone that it's actually totally chill and it wasn't in our national interest to talk about it. So yeah, so we've got great relations with them, but that's all
Wow.
super tangential. There's a whole thing there, but yeah, that kind of brings us
Cool.
up to date with what's been happening there. There's probably
Yeah.
going to be continue to keep updating through the news
Yeah.
segment of our show in the future.
I'm really glad to have like learned more about it, because I feel like when we do like get, yeah, like when there is more news, we'll all be more well educated, and like chat will be able to parse it better, and we'll be able to chat about it better. Like I
Yeah,
feel like we've learned a lot today.
it's it sometimes I feel like because we learn so much about the way that American and British politics work just through the media, and then sometimes I feel like like Australian and New Zealand politics are sometimes like, like they're not as understood as well. So people don't realize that there is also just this like really horrific shit happening down here as well. And sometimes,
Yeah, it's
people
really
spend
important.
more time, even in New Zealand political circles, talking more about stuff that is happening overseas and what's happening right here. But yeah, we should get into some of these questions. There's two questions we've got.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
A
Okay.
whole two, a whole two.
Yeah. The first
yeah.
one, they're both from Talks to All. The first one
Mm,
is, it was asked when you were talking about some of the history of the conflict between settlers
oh yeah.
and Maori people. So it was just, what percentage of the population is Maori these days? Has it remained stable, or is it declining?
Ooh, it is. I think it's hovering just under 20% at the moment. I'm I'm not sure how that has gone over the years. I think that it has. I mean, like initially, it would have been about 99%, and it's a rapid period of shrinking. Um, and then like obviously, yeah, I think I do remember reading something about how it had been growing very slightly over the last little while, and I think that is also like there's a combination of um there's more, I would say, there's a lot more Maori people that are actively maintaining Maori culture these days. Whereas for a long time, like in my grandparents' generation, it was very much about assimilating because, this is like the generation they were still getting beat in schools and all this kind of stuff. So I know I have friends that have parents and grandparents that are Maori, and they are like literally like as Maori as you can get, but they have English names and don't consider themselves Maori because their parents before them were like, no, we're raising you European and things like
Oh,
that.
wow.
So there is even like, or there's like people that are like from my generation that, have like, like might be like mixed race, like I am. So my dad is Maori and my mom is like sort of like New Zealand European. And so there's a
Mm.
lot of people who historically, like if they were maybe the generation beforehand, they probably would have just been like, oh, I'm just like European, but maybe I'm a little bit Maori or whatever like that. Whereas like these days, I think people are just a little bit more like it's not as much of a stigma anymore. So now like people that are mixed race are more likely to be like, yeah, no, I'm blonde or redheaded, but I'm fucking Maori, whatever,
Sure,
Um,
sure.
so yeah, so I think that is a dual thing where it's like not just that there are more Maori people being born, more Maori families, but it's like that there are more people choosing
Not
not to
hiding.
kind of
Yeah.
choosing to like openly identify as Maori as opposed in the past. Like a good example is the leader of New Zealand First, and actually, so both leaders of the leader of New Zealand First and the leader of the ACT Party are both Maori. So Winston Peters is Maori and hates it. So people have spoken over the years about knowing him growing up, and he pretended that he was like Greek, which is interesting because my dad actually used to get people would always ask him if he was Mediterranean because he's like, kind of like olivey skin, but would like, like I guess there was an idea of what Maori was, and it was like this very like kind of like this racist caricature or whatever like that. So outside of that, people would be like, "Oh, are you like Mediterranean or something like that?" So Winston Peters actually denied that he was Maori in his youth, and pretended to be something else, which is like interesting because a lot of his anti-Maori politics are, I would say, founded in kind of like an insecurity and internalized kind of like shitty image of what it means to be Maori.
The other question we had was also from Talks to Wall, and was, sounds like the original treaties were an agreement between the Maori and the Crown. Maori able to push back or reject the treaty rollbacks, or the coalition government can just change it on their own? I feel like you talked through a lot of this when you carried on with the history of it, but like, go ahead.
In summary, so the Waitangi Tribunal is the kind of the I guess like the court that is established to push back on that. So a lot of the time what will happen is that the government will announce that they're going to do something. There'll be a bunch of advisory boards that'll be like, that's a treaty breach, you shouldn't do that, you can't do that, whatever. They'll do it anyway. And then at some later point, the tribunal will be like, actually, look, this is a clear treaty breach. This is broken law. We need to fix this or whatever. So generally, it's like the tribunal won't be able to stop them from doing it when they're doing it, but then like you can kind of take them to court after. Sometimes just knowing that it is going to be a breach is enough for people to stop doing something. Like for more like, when in the past there's been sometimes when Labour have been called out for things and they've been like, oh, okay, actually, no, we won't do that. But Labour have also done really terrible things. Like they were responsible for the Foreshore and Seabed Act, which was one of the largest claims of Maori land by the state in the entire history of our country, stuff like that, where it's like they'll just do it, and then it's kind of up to Maori to kind of take the fight back to them and take them to court. And just through the last few decades there have been some really amazing treaty lawyers, Maori treaty lawyers, which include people like Matua Moana Jackson, who was some of you might know, he wrote a lot about like decolonization in New Zealand. He was a treaty lawyer and he had a lot to do with this kind of stuff. Really amazing man who passed away just last year, sadly. A great man that was also like a mentor to a lot of really amazing activists and like kind of politicians and stuff. But so that's kind of how the challenges to the treaty go. In a
well, those
nutshell,
are the only questions we had.
Okay,
well, those are
cool,
the only questions we had. So I guess the only things left are, please remember that we are supported by our viewers at patreon.com/red_planet. There are various tiers you can support us at, but at the highest tier, the reward is that you get a special thank you on the end of every show that looks like this. Thank you to our sickos, JBP, Queen Pib, Cassie Tastrophe, and Risk Inverse. You make this all possible. Thank you so much. There are foxes having a territorial dispute outside my window, so I honestly, I do hope the podcast can pick this up. and if
I
not,
can't hear them.
we'll just
Yeah.
have to have it cut
I
out.
can't
But
hear them. Yeah.
that's such a shame because it's such a beautiful sound. If anyone's ever
Oh,
heard
you can't hear
foxes
them? Well,
having a
actually, yeah,
territorial,
it's outside my window too. Yeah.
oh
That's
wow.
a fox out there. You can't hear them. Don't worry about it. They're just out of frame.
Tim, you
um,
didn't give us homework. Have we got homework?
oh,
We got home. I would say, wherever you are in the world, look at. I would say check in with what's going on with Indigenous politics in your area, or maybe even not just like Indigenous politics, but like, if there is like, because yeah, I don't know, like. Well, actually, that's a good question. Would travelers be considered Indigenous? Is that?
yeah. So
Yeah.
this is a thing that I would love to get into if there was the right way to frame it in a discussion episode sometime. But I think that travelers are a one of several different angles that we should be taking on a sort of autochthonous politics of the working class in Europe.
Mm,
That like there are ways of life that are being pushed out really hard.
yeah.
And then there's so rarely solidarity between ways of life like that and ways of life like I was saying before, like migrants and then just like the working class who are just like like the poorest of the poor of the working
Mm,
class who are just like surviving on benefits and have like all sorts of issues in their communities and their families. Like I would love for us to have a discussion that looks at
yeah.
how that could come together at some point. But yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. I guess yeah. I mean, for Europeans, yeah, maybe it is travelers, but
Yeah.
also to some degree, like I don't know, just the working
Yeah.
class, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Just
we the
yeah, like
people.
I guess my homework is to look into any groups that kind of make like vaguely fit under that kind of umbrella, and yeah, just looking to see and if there's anything that you can do to to kind of stand in solidarity with them, join up with any kind of groups, see if they're having any like protest actions that you can go along to support. And I would say the main thing is just to really understand what's happening there, because yeah, you can show up to the protests and all that kind of stuff, but really, if you actually really understand what's going on, you can see how a lot of these groups exist in and antagonistic relationships with the state. Then I think that will actually give you a really good understanding of like I guess like a more in-depth understanding of their struggle. And yeah, that's I think that's going to be it for this week. But yeah, so
Okay.
check in on that. But what if I want to find out more about my good friend, Dr. Donald Mule? Where can I go for that?
You can go to bed@mule.com. I'm sleepy boy. I'm a working boy now. I gotta get up for work in the morning, and that's why I've not been doing too much on my Patreon. But you can still find me at patreon.com/DJ Mule. So go there. Linktree.ee/DJ Mule. It's DJ MUEL for our podcast listeners. Yeah, I'm working on some stuff. I've still got stuff on the go. I've still got my Kevin McDonald video. Bastard Landlord Influencers episode 2. It's only taken me 7 months to try and get that out there. So let's see if it takes any more months or weeks. What about? Do you know what? I'm not gonna treat this like a circle. I'm gonna bat it right back at Tim. What if I want to find out more about Tim? Where could I find out more about you?
You can find me on YouTube and Twitch as Conquest of Dread. Not that I've streamed much outside of Red Planet for a really long time, but I've got some old streams up there if you want to go see me playing Dark Souls or anything like that. You can also find me over on Twitter and Blue Sky as Dread Conquest, which is where the kind of spicy, low effort shit posts go. Also on Twitter, you can look up. I've been working on this tabletop RPG project for a long time, Dark RPG. This is the latest little draft. I just got this printed out the other day of where we're at the time. It's like almost 200 pages, it's fully illustrated, all that kind of stuff. It's heavy. Like if you can't see it, you can hear how heavy that is. And it's almost done, which is which is sick as hell. But yeah, so jump over to Twitter and look up Dark RPG 2000 if you want to see that. There's a little bit of stuff about it there. You can even see what some people have had to say about it. There's a couple quote tweets in there, some interesting testimonials. But what about Soph? Where can we find out more from the Martian girl, Sophie?
You can go to linkter.ee/Sophie from Mars, find all my links. I don't really use Twitter. I don't post that much on Blue Sky. I am tumbling quite a lot at the moment. I love my blog. I'm so proud of my blog. I have little thoughts and takes there. So, you might check out my Tumblr. If you'd like to help me to be able to afford food and keep the lights on in my house, then you go through Linktree and just send me money directly, or go to my Patreon and help me out there. I've been on hiatus from releasing videos, but I'm really, really close to finishing a big project called The Mad and the Mentally Ill that I've been working on. That's been my based thing. I've been doing more writing each week. That'll be done soon, and then it'll be up on my Patreon. And then I'm going to make a bunch of videos and release them as a big return from hiatus. So subscribing to my Patreon if you want to subscribe to it, or just supporting me as I return from my hiatus this coming month would be ways you can support me, and that's all to be found through linktree.ee/Sophie from Mars. So please go there. Cool. Well, that's us then, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye.